Atkins versus Priti Patel, and Priti Patel wins.
Where's the Victoria Atkins thing come from? Have you seen her? Have you
into existence.
They need a one nation.
What are you all seeing and hearing that I'm not?
They're going to have a one nation person, and it'll be her.
You think that's going to be? It's going to be absolutely fascinating to watch. Can I say a huge big thanks to all of you for joining me this evening. Peter Cobbler, of course, I know you'll be presenting tomorrow. Richard Power, Said, and Benedict Spence as well. Thank you so much for all your analysis and, frankly, the laughs as well. And all their books are available in every rubbish bookstore and good bookstores as well. I'm done for the night, and we'll be back with you at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning to look at all the analysis, and who knows what is going to be going on by then. Up next, in just a couple of moments after the news, it is Mike Graham taking you through till 4 o'clock in the morning. And then, of course, at 4 o'clock, we will have Ian Collins, and then he'll be taken over again by Mike again. I'm done for the night. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
side. This is Talk.
Good evening and welcome to Election Night. It's a special. We are here from 1 until 4 and we are going to bring you some pretty bad news, I'm afraid. We're going to be bringing you probably Conservative minister after Conservative minister getting kicked out of their jobs, losing their seats all up and down the country. We've got the SNP getting absolutely rogered up in Scotland. And also, of course, we've got the rise of Reform, which you have to say is maybe the story of the entire night so far. Reform are predicted to get as many as 13 seats. We'll bring you all the details. We've had the exit poll. Thanks very much to Julie Hartley-Brewer and her guest for the last 3 hours. We've got Tim Montgomery with us here this morning. We've got Scarlett Maguire as well. Very good morning to both of you. We are going to be going at it, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be telling you the truth about what's really happened. They're all looking very smug over at the BBC, which can only mean one thing. The lefties have taken over. So I'm afraid we're going to have to give them a bit of a kicking. 0344 499 1000 is the number. We're going to take your calls. Nobody else wants to hear from the public, but we do. And that's why we predicted that Reform were going to do an awful lot better than anybody else said. And we're going to be right once again. Send us a WhatsApp voice note as well, because we love those. Just record it, send it via WhatsApp to the same number, 0344 499 1000. This is me, Mike Graham. It's an election special. Let's get it on. So, here we are. Tim Montgomery, I've seen you this evening several times, looking very dapper, if I may say so, but also looking rather depressed about the sight of the Tory party perhaps beginning to draw its last breath.
Well, I push back a bit on that, actually, Mike.
I knew you would.
I thought that it would be worse than it actually is. I know it's a historic defeat. I'm not trying to belittle that.
Yeah.
People wanted to punish the Tories, and my goodness, they have. First past the post as an electoral system really allows people to get rid of governments in a way that proportional representation doesn't on the continent.
Yes.
You know, and so, look, the party's suffered a massive defeat, but it's not extinction level. You know, some of these polls that we spent far too much time discussing during this campaign.
We're talking about 60 Conservative seats,
absolutely, and we've got twice as many as that. It's not good, but it's not the end of the Conservative Party. And you said Reform's rise is perhaps the story of the night, and I have a lot of sympathy with that. And Scarlett may disagree with this. She may be more up to date with the numbers than I am. But what we're looking at, seems to me, is Labour winning a massive majority with something like under 40% of the vote. So they will have got something like 4 to 8% less than Theresa May got when she lost her majority. So I support first the past the post system because of what I've just said. It allows us to get rid of governments we want to get rid of. But Labour have got a massive majority with actually not that huge amount of support.
True.
You know, in the top 30s. And, you know, tweets are sort of reading from well-sourced people now saying Labour might actually lose seats to Reform in the north of England. This is not a government, despite what the headline looks like, being elected on a wave of enthusiasm by the British people.
And it's not as many seats as they had under Tony Blair, is it? And it's not as much of a vote share that they had under Jeremy Corbyn, which is kind of a weird twist to the story. Scarlett, you're the person crunching the numbers here. Tell us what you're seeing.
Yeah, if the exit poll does transpire to be true, and so far it looks like it is pretty much tracking, then I think we will see a situation in which there's not a huge amount of sort of enthusiasm for Labour, in that, as you quite rightly say, it looks like they'll get under 40% of the vote, which is quite extraordinary then to have a majority roughly the same size as Blair's, actually slightly less, but only slightly. And I think that, but you know, there are quite a lot of signs for that already here. So like if you looked at Keir Starmer's popularity ratings, he was the least popular leader of the opposition that was about to become Prime Minister. And if you looked as well about how enthusiastic even Labour voters felt about their party and about their vote, Labour voters, people voting Labour this time round, were less enthusiastic about this party than they were in 2019, than they were in 2017. And so it's quite an interesting story that's telling you. And I think this story about Reform, whether or not Reform managed to take seats off Labour, especially in the northeast of England, I'm still not quite sure we're going to see that. I'm still not quite sure that 13 is going to transpire. Let's wait and see. But either way, I think it shows you that Keir Starmer in the next Parliament, it's not just the Conservatives that Nigel Farage is going to be giving a hard time. The threat from Reform is going to be a headache for Labour as well as for whatever's left of the Conservative
And
Party.
presumably, from what Tim was saying about the vote share, it's because the right-wing vote has been split, right? It's because Reform has gone into the middle there from the right and sort of taken seats away, or maybe taking seats away, certainly taking votes away from the Tory party. We've got Nigel Farage at the moment who's apparently predicting Reform will win 6 million votes. And so far, he hasn't been wrong about anything.
No, let's see. I mean, I do think it's very impressive that Reform, if you think about this time last year, they were in low single digits. They were struggling to even get to 5% of the polls. They now look like they're going to easily surpass UKIP's high watermark in 2015 when they got just under 13% of the vote and 3.5 million votes. That is quite an extraordinary turnaround in just a year. Let's see how many they end up with. But even if they end up with, say, 5 or 6 seats, that's still a big deal.
Right. Yeah. Well, we've seen Robert Buckland going already. He's the first sort of big name, I suppose you would say.
But I don't know if you heard his speech, his concession speech.
I've only read people saying what a great speech it was.
Well, you know, it was generous to his opponent. We don't get enough of that in politics, frankly. And a lot of people in politics actually get on well behind the scenes. Right. But, like, you know, we spend all of our time, of course, focusing on the differences between politicians. But I think what he did say in his speech was really important. He said, look, there's all sorts of debates that the Conservative Party is now going to face about whether it moves more Brexity, more rightish, more liberally. But he said, the people out there want solutions, and that for me is where the Conservative Party must go. We're at our best when we're the serious party, the adults in the room, the competent party. We haven't been that for a long time. But this Labour government that we now know is coming in will not solve the country's problems. It didn't spell out in its manifesto how it would do so. It doesn't have it doesn't have a clue.
And let's face it, the country has a lot of problems.
The problem has a lot of. The party will come back and deserve to come back if it uses its time in opposition to say, this is what's wrong with the NHS, this is what's wrong with our international competitiveness. You may not like these solutions, but we can show you how they'll work. A little bit like a doctor's mandate.
Right. But won't they just get at the beginning, and certainly from Labour, well, hang on a minute, you know, you say you've got solutions, but you've been here for 14 years.
Of course.
I mean, of course, the Tories did that when they got in. They blamed Tony Blair and Gordon Brown for at least a decade for the things that they couldn't do. Labour will just do the same thing, won't they?
They will do it. And look, one thing the Tory party does have in abundance now is time. You know, we've got 5 years, almost certainly. Labour have got plenty of a big enough majority to stay in power without any challenge. We've got these 4 or 5 years, if it is a 4-year parliament or 5-year parliament, to show that we're serious again, we're adults again. People think the Labour Party's heart's always in the right place. I would question that. But they usually elect us. We've dominated post-war British electoral history because we're seen as the grown-ups in the room. Getting that reputation back is the number 1, number 2 and number 3 priority for Conservatives in opposition.
And as far as what you're looking at, Scarlett, in terms of some of the bigger names that are likely to fall in the course of this show, nevertheless in the course of the night, we're expecting that sort of thing to start happening around about 3 a.m. Are you seeing, like, for example, Rishi Sunak's seat, if under this particular projection he keeps that, I understand.
I think he'll keep it, and I thought he was going to keep it anyway. There's no sort of history of Labour voting there. We had it in our projection holding by about 8 points. I mean, which is not safe, but is looking quite a lot better than quite a lot of the other Conservative seats that are projected to hold.
OK, we've got some clips to show you, obviously, tonight. We'll be going live to every single place we can go live to. We've got correspondents in all sorts of places. We've got guests coming in from all sorts of other places. We've got Nigel Farage right now. Let's hear from him, talking about what's
It's midnight. There are 2 results in from the northeast of England that put Reform on 30% of the vote. That is way more than any possible prediction or projection. It's almost unbelievable. And what does it mean? It means we're going to win seats, many seats, I think, right now across the country. But to watch the TV coverage, it's almost comical. There's not a single representative on there from Reform UK. Mainstream media are in denial just as much as our political parties. This is going to be 6 million votes plus. This, folks, is huge.
And I think you can't disagree with any of that, can you?
No. I would have voted for Nigel Farage if I'd been in Clacton. I know I'm a Conservative Party member. You know, Conservative Party is in my blood in a way, but he talks in a way that Conservative politicians used to talk about immigration, about tax, about crime. And
about fairness as well.
About fairness, and about just representing the ordinary people against an establishment that really doesn't. Let's go back to that Brexit vote. Why do people vote for Brexit, Mike? Some, like me, voted because they wanted to reassert our sovereignty as a nation. But a lot of people voted for Brexit as a way of saying to the people in Westminster, the economy's not working for me anymore. I don't think you understand my problems. You're in London, a great, magnificent global city, but here in Hartlepool, here in the Welsh Valleys, here in Lincolnshire, life is tough, and you are living a life that doesn't understand our problems. And the Tories didn't respond to that cry for help. The levelling up agenda that Boris Johnson promised 5 years ago wasn't delivered. Nigel Farage is still representing that cry of,
and many
anger.
Tory MPs, as I remember it very, very well, I'm afraid, because I was sort of stapled to the floor of College Green. I was in that tent for weeks and weeks on end when nothing was happening. I even had a special session on Saturday, I remember, for Oliver Letwin, and nothing happened again. And so people were looking at it going, you people are now trying to actively stop what we wanted to do, what we wanted to vote for, and that's where the Tory party went wrong. But do these figures, Scarlett, show that the Labour Party has now recaptured parts of the north of England that they lost under Jeremy Corbyn? Because famously they won Putney, didn't they, in the last election, and not much else.
Yeah, I think Putney might have been actually their only gain, if I remember correctly. Yeah, it was literally. No, I mean, the thing is, the results that we're getting through at the moment are in the northeast of England. These are places that are sort of incredibly safe Labour seats. And yes, Reform is making quite huge inroads to the vote in some of them, sort of 30%, as Nigel Farage was just saying. But we're not quite in the sort of red wall sort of heartlands. But I mean, I think unless something very unpredictable is going on with Reform, let's look out for Ashfield, Lee Anderson seats, because I suspect that one will go Reform. Now, but otherwise, no. I mean, those, if you think about the sort of national swing that we're seeing, all of those red wall seats should be easy for Labour now at this election. They shouldn't be a fight.
But at the moment, the projection that says 13 seats for Reform, so far we've seen them coming second in the first three counts that came back up in the northeast of England. Outside, someone was saying, well, UKIP did quite well in the northeast as well, so it's difficult to extrapolate it too much. But there's still big percentages, like 29%, 20-odd% in places like Newcastle.
They're big percentages. I suspect they didn't have much of a ground campaign there either, because they were always in places that Labour were going to very comfortably hold. I think we'll see. I think the most interesting seat to look out for that's probably going to come quite soon is Barnsley South. So that's a Labour-held seat that Reform should, well, if the exit poll is to believe, that Reform will take. So I think if Reform don't take that, then maybe we'll give a bit of pause to thought and see if that exit poll number for Reform is looking right. But it'll be really interesting to see what that result is.
There's one rumour on Twitter, and I should say it is only a rumour, from Patrick O'Flynn, the right-of-centre commentator. He's saying Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, might be in trouble.
Oh, really?
So, that the Reform...
I'm just seeing that,
So, the thing is, what we could
I think it's going to be a very interesting night. I think we're going to be quite surprised by quite a lot of stuff.
I'm getting quite excited. I shouldn't be, but I love elections.
Well, it's hugely exciting, and this is what I was saying, because lots of people have been saying, because we've been doing lots of these sorts of interviews in the run-up to the election, everyone was saying, oh, Scarlett was so bored of polls, we're so bored of this campaign. And I was trying to say, no, but you don't understand, election night's going to be fascinating, because you're going to have so many three-way fights, four-way fights. You're going to have results that are decided within 2%, 3% of a winning margin, and you're going to have lots of MPs, I think, elected on less than 30% of the vote.
I wonder whether, ultimately, when the history's been written, this won't just be about a Labour supermajority. It might be just the end of Britain's two-party political system.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right about that, and I've been saying this for a while, and people weren't listening to me, because I was like, there's something happening here, and it wasn't just about, Reform's PR campaign saying there's definitely something going on. There really is something going on.
Well, people are fed up, and you can get to this in lots of different ways. You can see it with the support for Reform and for the Green Party, actually. It suggests that we're going to see. But then also you can get at it other ways as well. So we asked people, if there was an option on the ballot that said none of the above, would you tick the none of the above box, or would you actively vote for a candidate? Found 28% of people this time around said none of the above.
Exactly right.
28%.
Right.
Yeah,
and for a lot of people, that's a Reform vote as well, because that resonates more with them. Now, we've got a couple of things to say. Keir Starmer's seat is apparently imminent. One of the things we haven't got yet is Basildon Billericay in Essex, which is where Richard Holden, the Conservative Party chairman,
I so want him to lose,
of course, was parachuted in a way which I think I'm right in saying, did they not just completely wipe away all the other candidates and just give it to him?
Yeah, so this is the Tory party chairman who's supposed to be about protecting members' rights. He imposed himself in a one-person shortlist on that seat on the last possible day of nominations. If you wanted an image to confirm the worst caricatures that some people have of the Conservative Party, of selfish individualism, he did that. I'm being a very naughty boy here as a Conservative Party member, but I would dearly love him to lose. He deserves to be punished for that.
If the Conservative Party needs to be taught a lesson, maybe it starts with him. Maybe that's where we should go. Let's get a voice note. You can join in, of course. Send us a WhatsApp voice note, 0344 499 1000. This is from, I didn't say who it's from. Who's it from? Let's go.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for working through the night for us. Really appreciate it. Right, OK, so where are all these Reform votes going in the next general election? Because you can't tell me they're going to go straight back to the Tory party. By predictions, there's anything between 19 and 25% of the vote to reform. They don't just migrate to another party. They have to go somewhere. Whether it's extrapolated into seats or not, it doesn't matter. Nigel Farage is a rock star. Everybody knows it. It's what he is. Look, be careful, you, Ian, Julia, Peter, everyone, because you're working all through the night and tomorrow morning. Be careful. Thank you.
We're always careful here at Talk. It's what we're famous for, but thank you. All it says is from Needs and Dreams there. I'm sorry I haven't got a better name for you. Theo Usherwood's going to be here in a minute as well. Reform supporters must take heart, says Karen in Mansfield. It was a 4-week thrust from near zero after a snap election call, and that is pretty amazing. It is a 5-year plan. Somebody who doesn't give a name. Is anyone else scared about what the next 5 years or more is going to hold? Tim Montgomery's put his hand up. Scarlett, are you scared? She's not scared. She's not scared of anything. And neither are we. Right here, listen, the lefties are taking over, but that's not going to stop us, because we're still here and we're going to be telling you what they're getting wrong, because they'll be getting everything wrong. Don't worry about that. 0344 499 1000 is the number. We got loads more. This is an election special. We're up all night.
On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
And he said they would... I said,
Welcome back to the all-night election. I nearly said morning glory there. It's not morning glory because it's the middle of the night glory. I suppose you can call it that. Labour landslide is what everybody's doing. If you've just joined us, you've got a big night ahead because we've got expert after expert coming in to tell us exactly what is going on with this Labour landslide. The projected numbers are these: Labour 410 seats, Conservative 131, Lib Dem 61, Reform 13, SNP 10, a disaster we haven't yet even talked about. The Greens with 2, doubling their vote from Brighton to Brighton and Bristol, and then the others are 23. I understand, Scarlett, that's 18 in Northern Ireland and a couple of other bits and pieces. I'm presuming Jeremy Corbyn might be one of those. I'm assuming George Galloway might be one of those. We haven't talked about that yet. Theo Usherwood's here with us. Should we address that? I mean, Corbyn will get in a little while, I think.
He's going to be very close, and Labour had been hoping to shut him out because, of course, he said he was going to stand against the Labour Party.
Right.
Keir Starmer had been trying to get rid of him for ages, and when Jeremy Corbyn said he was going to stand, it was an immediate expulsion under their rules. And, of course, he looks like he may well win in Islington North because he's got that huge local support over Gaza and Palestine. And that's going to be a thorn in the side for Keir Starmer.
Well, I wonder about that.
It's going to be difficult.
According to this, this. I don't know if you can change our mind on this, Scarlett, but there doesn't appear to be any sort of leg room, if you like, for the sort of the northern towns that might follow what happened at Rochdale in the by-election and might actually vote for an independent candidate because of Gaza.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are quite a lot of Labour PPCs that were sort of worried about what was going to happen in some of those northern places. I think especially if you think of somewhere like Batley and Dewsbury, I think is the new constituency name. They're quite worried there. It was Rachel Reeves's old advisor that's been sort of put in there, very worried about the threat, and George Galloway did very well there in 2021. But I think, again, this points to, if you think about what this means for the next few years, you're going to have Keir Starmer sitting there with some MPs in Labour who are feeling this massive threat from reform, with reform on 30% in their constituencies. You're going to have some MPs who are looking over their shoulder at independents racking up massive votes over Gaza. You're going to have the same with Greens, and then trying to keep them all happy or even just on board and compliant is going to be really hard. It's going to be really difficult. And Theo, you were saying that the size of the reform vote in the North East that we saw, certainly in the first three constituencies that counted, huge, right?
Yes, so if you go up, and these are Labour seats, right? So in Houghton and Sunderland South, in the 2019 election, the Brexit Party, previously Reform, got around 9% of the vote. They're now up to 29% vote share. In Blythe, it's 27%. Keir Starmer wanted a 10-year project, but looking at these numbers, it's very difficult to see that unless he has some quick wins, how reform doesn't go even further in 5 years' time and potentially puts his vote under threat. Now, if the Tories can do some sort of deal with Nigel Farage, and there are already mutterings that they're going to have to find some sort of alliance, Steve Baker, former Northern Ireland Minister, was talking about it, and actually get organised, then it's going to be a real question. I think they can come back quite quickly. This is not the 10-year project because the vote is spread so thin, reform has done so much better that Keir Starmer was hoping for. He's going to be under pressure at the next election, despite it being a majority of 165. And there's not a huge amount of money around. You've been discussing it previously. So it's going to be very difficult to get those quick wins.
Well, Keir Starmer's going to be under pressure immediately, isn't he? His first day in the job happens to be a Friday, and we all know he doesn't work beyond 6 o'clock on a Friday. So, I mean, I know that's only a joke and he doesn't like it, but we're going to keep doing it because we like it, we love it. And, you know, the thing is, he's got such a massive in-tray. You know, there were stories around a couple of days ago saying the first crisis he has to solve is the prisons crisis. Well, guess what? There's also a crisis in the NHS, there's a crisis in education, there's a crisis in the Channel, there's a crisis in our defence budget. I mean, everywhere you look, there's a crisis, right?
Yeah, it's massively hard. I do think, though, the one thing I think it's going to be incredibly hard to deliver. I think that's actually, to start with, that's the only thing that matters to the public, is that you deliver on these priorities, namely the economy, NHS and immigration. But I would say that the sort of other way of looking at it, and I think this is unlikely just because it's going to be such a difficult ask, but public expectations are so low of Keir Starmer and his party and all politicians generally that actually it might be easy to outperform them, but I'm not quite sure that will happen.
Yeah, I mean, Keir Starmer has not been known for his, you know, sort of incredible sort of agility, has it? I mean, when he gets asked a question, he gets flustered. I mean, I don't know whether he's going to be getting special, you know, kind of coaching lessons between now and tomorrow morning, but, you know, he's suddenly in the biggest job in his business, and that's going to be tough for him.
It's a huge job. He has done big jobs before because, of course, he was the Director of Public Prosecution.
Yeah, but nothing like this.
Nothing like this. No.
I know he keeps saying that he had this big job before and he served the nation. It's like, no, you didn't. You did not. You did a pretty crappy job, actually, all things considered. And a lot of people that you prosecuted, you know, didn't get prosecuted properly, etc., etc.
And I think like he needs to deliver. And if you looked at that manifesto and you went over the numbers, and lots of us did, we went over it with a fine-tooth comb, the numbers didn't add up. And how's he actually going to... you can't do vague promises when you're Prime Minister. You get hammered. That's why the Tories are in so much... have been walloped tonight by the electorate. If you don't deliver, this is... There was a lot of complaints. There was an editorial in the Times, and the Times said, you'll get the votes, but you've got to actually win our respect, win our... And there were lots of people saying, oh, I don't think that's right. I think if he's got the mandate, then he's got the mandate. No, the electorate is unforgiving. Keir Starmer needs to deliver from day one. He needs to deliver quickly because this is a paper... If you look at the margins, this is a paper-thin win. I know it's a big number. I know it's the biggest number since 1906 when the Tories went down to 157 seats.
But it's a slightly... it's an unusual number, isn't it? Because it looks as big as it is. And yes, it is. But as we've been saying already, it's not as big as Tony Blair's and it's not as big and vote share-wise as what Corbyn had.
And it's not even as... Yeah, they've got the majority majority of Corbyn, I mean, all the Corbynistas are jumping up and down saying, hang on a moment, our absolute boy in 2017. that's their phrase for him, the absolute boy, magic grandpa. You know, he won 40% of the vote and it was a hung parliament back in 2017. And if you add up, if you tot up the SNP vote, the Liberal Democrat vote, you're going to have a predominantly left-wing House of Commons overall. And then if you go out into the country, you know what your listeners are like. It's the majority of the country is small C Conservative. They may not have voted Tory this time round, but they're small C Conservative. And I think there's a real danger. There's this even more of a disconnect between your listeners here at Talk and what the House of Commons is made up of in terms of a left-wing,
and also,
overwhelmingly
let's face it, all the people that voted for Brexit, by and large, were fed up with Westminster politics. They were fed up with being told what to do by Brussels and by London, and that's why they changed.
And it's going to be bumpy.
Right.
And you know, if you've got that disconnect between voters and the political, you know, the government,
the political class,
that is not a good thing. He needs, now, if Keir Starmer can bridge that by actually getting things right, stopping the small boats, for example.
Well, that's not going to happen, is it? It's just...
But you looked at his plan, and of course, actually, when you looked at the Rwanda plan, it actually fared quite well, because he, you know, when he was actually questioned on it, he said, "Oh, we're going to send people back to their country of origin." You said, "Well, you're going to send people who fled Afghanistan back to their country of origin?"
Even Rishi Sunak beat him on that one. You know, he couldn't answer the question. He didn't really know, and he came across as a little bit naive and a little bit kind of... And none of these people, effectively, have been in government before.
No. And this is new for all of them. They're going to... I think what you're going to have, and I'd look out for Douglas Alexander up in Scotland. I think what they're going to start...
Do you think he's going to be Foreign Secretary?
Yeah, they're going to biff Lammy. David Lammy. I've heard that now from
I think a lot of people would think that was a good idea.
Yeah, they're going to biff David Lammy. He's insisting at the moment that he's not going to be... He's not for the chop. But I think what Starmer's going to do is he's going to bring back a lot of the old guard from the years of Gordon Brown. What they call in Parliament retreads. They basically can't get enough of it, so they all come back in.
Well, it's not a bad idea to have some people who've been in that place before and they actually know a bit about what they're doing. Scarlett, feel free to jump in here at any time. I don't want to just have a monologue with Theo Oxford. But let's get a voice note to break things up. Peter has something to say. Go for it.
Morning, Mike. Sounds like it's going to be a good night for Starmer. Really pleased with the way that the Brexit voters held out. For it to make my night, I'm just looking for Yvette Cooper to lose her seat in Pontefract and Castleford after the way she's acted since the Brexit referendum.
Well, I mean, a lot of people are going to be very happy, particularly those who went out and voted for reform. The other thing that I found, and I don't know if you've seen this yet, Scarlett, on the sort of the headline numbers, the turnout was bigger than we were told it was going to be, I think.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, including myself, actually, were speculating that it might be quite low turnout because everyone is so turned off as we're discussing. But actually, it looks like it's not apathy; it's sort of anti-politics. It's not just I'm going to stay at home. It's actually, sort of screw you. I'm going to come out and vote and protest. Whether that be Reform, Green, Independent, or you know, whatever it may be, but it's a sort of it's not just like a sort of resignation at the two main parties. It's a active resentment.
Absolutely right. We're going to do news headlines every half an hour, so we're going to take some right now. Stay where you are, you two. Don't go anywhere. Let's get some news.
Tonight is political party night on Talk.
Stay up all night with the UK's top team on the ultimate Talk election party all-nighter.
Sample a night of deep political vision and crucial constituency comment. Kicking off with Julia Hartley-Brewer, first past the polling stations from 10 p.m.
Followed by speculation, swings and surprises as the votes come in with me, Grand Mixer Mike Graham, in the nation's definitive anatomy of an election from 1am.
Then Ian Collins hits the decks, back where he belongs, out on the terrace for a post-vote 4am poll party.
The Talk ultimate election political party all-nighter.
Tonight from 10 p.m, racing through till dawn, election night is go on Talk.
Do you know, I'm quite looking forward to it. I haven't had an election in over 5 years.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
That's right, we're keeping you up all night. This is, of course, an all-nighter. We are going to be here all the way through. I'm here till 4, and after that, you're going to get Ian Collins from 4 till 7, and I'm back again from 7 till 10. Then Julie Hartley-Brewer's coming back again after that, so it's going all the way through till 1 o'clock, by which time, of course, we'll know everything. I assume we'll expect some kind of resignation from Rishi Sunak at some point through the course of the morning.
Yes, we're expecting Rishi Sunak to resign. It'll probably happen, I'd imagine, early doors, about 8 or 9.
Yeah.
He will, of course, get...
Will he be waiting for a rainstorm so he can sort of get back out there without...
There's a large forecast, a weather cloud coming over Downing Street.
Right.
We're expecting him to resign, and it'll be interesting to see. The only thing that he might do is he might stay on as the leader of the Conservative Party while they pick a new leader, but I imagine he'll leave fairly sharpish. And there'll be a leadership contest underway, which will aim to the first round, where they select the 2 MPs between, in those 1922 committees. That'll aim to conclude before everybody breaks for their summer holidays, and then they'll have the contest over the summer. He'll resign on the steps of Downing Street. So you'll first hear from Rishi Sunak when his constituency is announced in Richmond, up in North Yorkshire, which of course was William Hague's seat. Big majority of 27,000. There'd been some talk he might lose it. He's not going to lose it. He'll keep it. He'll give a short speech, then he'll be down to London on the steps of Downing Street, resign, and then they'll pack their bags and move out of Downing Street, and Keir Starmer and his family are moving.
Presumably, he'll have to go back on another promise that he said he was going to stay in the country. I don't think he's going to do that. Liberal Democrats, by the way, have gained Harrogate and Knaresborough from the Tories. Now, apparently, they last held a seat between 1997 and 2010, so they must have got a more than 8.0 percentage point swing to take the seat from the Conservatives, ranked at number 21 on the party's target list. We haven't really talked about Lib Dems. What are you seeing? What's their popularity at the moment? Why?
Again, I think there's something with what we've seen from Ed Davies. Again, firstly, just trying to make as much noise as possible, but again, trying to set himself up as something that's a bit different from just like mainstream politicians in suits, because I think they're trying to pick up on that as well. I think mostly, though, the Lib Dems will not really be capitalising on that. It's just people across the country that I spoke to anyway were just casting their vote in a way that would best get the Conservatives out, and I think that's mostly what.
Do you think there's been a lot of that sort of tactical voting then?
Yeah, I really do. I think there was the strong desire, whichever, basically, if you weren't going to vote Conservative, it was whichever way you could do it to give a kicking. I mean, we even met people who were natural Reform voters who said they wanted to vote Reform, but actually this time round they're going to vote Labour just to make sure the Conservatives stayed out, but next time maybe Reform.
Right. I mean, there's no doubt that Reform has really kippered the Tories here, isn't it?
It's just taken a button up and gone straight through the middle of its vote. And they've cut it in half. And the Tories, I can't see a way that they come back quickly unless they find a way of doing a deal with Nigel Farage. And what's really crucial about Nigel Farage's success tonight is that he looks like he's won 13 seats. If he'd won 1 or 2, if it'd just been him and Richard Tice sitting on the back benches, chuntering away, leaning back, blah, 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 the Tories could have got... What they could have done is they could have got a moderate leader, Tom Tugendhat, looks nice in a suit kind of leader, moderate, and then they could have ignored him. They're not going to be able to ignore him now, because he's going to sit there with a block of MPs, around 13, people like Lee Anderson. He's going to be a power in the House of Commons.
It'll be like he was in the European Parliament, where he was a pain in the neck, pain in the backside. Lib Dems are apparently claiming that they have taken Chichester from Gillian Keegan, although it has not yet been declared. But normally when they make these kind of boasts, they're normally correct, aren't they?
Yeah, they normally are when people get... And that would be amazing for them to take Chichester. It's all the way down at 103 on their target list. They're far apart, far passing the 60 seats that we've got for the exit poll, 61 seats. If they have done, that's a big win for them.
Yeah, absolutely right. Poor old Gillian Keegan, it turns out nobody does give her an F for what she's doing for the country.
No, I mean, it's the first... It'll be probably the first one of the first names, one of those first Portillo moments. I think the big one's, of course, going to be Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor down in Godalming. That'll be a moment. I think that'll probably be the biggest of the night. Again, to the Liberal Democrats. The Lib Dems, they usually do this at by-elections. This is where they score well, and they've managed to turn it into a general election. And actually, props to Ed Davey, the leader of the Lib Dems, because he did a paddleboard, he did a roller coaster, he did cycling down a hill, he did that CPR thing, which was strange.
That was very odd. I saw that, and I don't know whether it had been edited, but it didn't look like it was meant to look. Anyway,
no, it didn't. But what he did is he's avoided doing what Nick Clegg did, where he just got completely sidelined in 2015, and then they just got decimated.
Although he did make it onto Plank of the Week this week, not for any of that stuff, but for going to Scotland in a private jet. and he actually said, "Oh well, the thing is, I know it's a bit silly, but you know, the important thing is that we're standing up for environmental, proper behaviour." And he said, "We want to put tax up on private jets." But the only way I could get, the only way I could get up here and see my children was to come on a private jet. And you're going, oh, of course, because everybody can do that. Yeah. You know, I just decided to take a helicopter down to my kids' school so that I could watch them play football on a Saturday and then go to work in Holland. I mean, you know, nobody talks like that. No. It's unbelievable. Hypocrite of the week.
We're going to hear a lot more from Ed Davey. He's going to be a bigger voice in the House of Commons, and he's never been thought of in Westminster as being the most inspiring character. Yeah. But they finally went for it. He's sort of slightly businessman, middle-of-the-road guy. Right. But he's delivered a result, and complete hypocrisy, of course, on that point. I mean you've got to.
Just own it, and
don't,
you know,
do as I say, not as I do, and I'm not sure. You know, he's going to have more of a spotlight on that. He keeps on doing that kind of thing. The voters on.
He's going to have to be careful. Plus, he's still dragging that stone that's got post office stamped on it all the way behind him, because he's never really dealt with that properly. Tina says, "I'm seeing some really downhearted comments from people who are saying reform might not do as well as first hoped. I hope they are wrong, but it's squeaky bum time now. Come on, reform, get some seats." I mean, when do you think we can expect to see the first seat? Is it Clacton, or is there one coming out before that?
I would have thought we'd have seen them before that. Clacton, I don't think we're expecting until about 3 a.m, 4 a.m. So I think you'll see more. I mean, we were expecting to see Richard Holden's result, as you were saying, and some other ones too. Yeah. So if they are on course to win 13, then we should start getting them. Barnsley South, exactly. But that's what I was saying.
Slim majority of 4,000 over the Brexit Party last time round, and that's Labour MP Stephanie Peacock. If they can overtake, leapfrog and win that seat, that would be extraordinary, and that would point, I think, crucially to the fact that reform are not just a threat to the Conservative Party, but are a big threat to the Labour Party. And Labour need to tread carefully over the next 5 years. They're going to have that big, that landslide victory, that huge majority. It's not quite on the scale that anybody was expecting, and there are some fine margins there, and that 2029, people sort of laughed at Nigel Farage when, do you remember, he came out at the beginning and said, we're on course for the big breakthrough is going to be 2029. 2029. People kind of laughed at him and said, what are you talking about, this is impossible. But going on these results, it would be the most, for your listener who texted in, this is the most positive launch pad that they could have hoped for, because this really gives an opportunity for them to deliver on that.
Absolutely right. Well, we've still got John Rentoul's quote, a tweet from 2014, which I point out to him every time he comes in. In 5 years' time, we will have forgotten who Nigel Farage was.
Well, that's the other thing you can say as well, because I think, even if they don't get 13 seats, even say it's 5 or 6, I still think that matters a lot. I mean, we could see from UKIP in 2015, yes, they only got 1 seat, but their impact on British electoral politics is huge.
Well, Nigel Farage has been the most influential British politician, I think, of the last 20 years, hasn't he?
Yeah,
you'd have to say that in terms of what's happened.
If you give decades to politicians, you give the 80s to Thatcher, you give the 90s to Blair, 90s probably again to Blair and Brown, just as the main politicians, and you give the 2010s to Farage every single time. The only person who could maybe come close would be Boris Johnson, but Nigel Farage, and that's unheard of to give. If you look back, that's unheard of to give
somebody who wasn't
of
actually an elected MP.
Exactly.
That's the thing. I mean, absolutely extraordinary. How about this from Martin in West Sussex? He says, Reform UK, amazing. Why worry about Labour after living through the dreadful political decisions the Tories made the last 14 years? I'm excited for a new Reform government in 29 or earlier. I mean, of course, there are people who say, well, the thing is, Starmer's going to run into trouble quite quickly. He might become quite unpopular quite quickly. But, I mean, with a majority like this, there's no danger, is there, that there's ever likely to be a plot to kind of remove him, because he's not the Tory party.
Well, I mean, you say that, but we saw Boris Johnson come in with a majority of 80 that was sort of similarly volatile and fragile. Yes, it was nowhere near as big. This Labour majority looks like it will be about 170 fine. There's a big difference between 80 and 170. But we cycled through 2 leaders since then, didn't we? So
the thing about the Labour Party is they don't quite have the mechanisms. If you're elected leader of the Tory party, it is a very dicey role. They've got all these mechanisms where they can get rid of you quite quickly, and Labour don't have those mechanisms. What I do think is going to happen, I think that the heir apparent is Wes Street. meeting. I don't think you're going to have that friction between Blair and Brown, number 10 and number 11.
We haven't talked about Angela Rayner yet, because we'll have to get to that. But I can tell you that breaking news right now, Stroud is apparently a Labour gain from the Tories. What can you tell us about that, if anything? I'm trying to look here to see if I've got any notes on it, but I don't think I have.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly one of the ones that you'd expect to go. It's not very far down Labour's target list. It was only quite a small Conservative majority. I think it's number 14 on Labour's target list, so it's absolutely one they should be clocking up.
OK. And here's some real news. The Tories have actually held a seat. Rayleigh and Wickford. How about that?
Which is Mark Francois, if I'm correct.
Is it? OK.
He's the former Defence Minister, big Brexit candidate. And, of course, these are important numbers because these are important announcements because we're looking also just in our own minds about the makeup of the Conservative Party.
Right.
Do you have the Wets, the One Nation as making up the main rump of the Conservative Party? We know people like Tom Tugendhat down in Tunbridge. He's going to come back into the party. Right. But more importantly, in terms of, you know, given how well Farage is doing, Mike, what is that? Where is that? You know, is there going to be that big rump of Brexiteers from the 2019 days? Mark Francois was really key in that as a deputy, really, to Steve Baker in delivering on Brexit, helping to deliver on Brexit. Do you see those types of MPs, Kemi Baden,
are they important?
Is there enough of them as well, so there can't be a stitch-up where they put in the Tories decide to put two moderates forward to the Conservative membership, and they all throw their arms up in the air and say, well, we don't want one.
Well, that is the big battle, isn't it? Let's just get another voice note before we carry on. Stuart on tonight's show. Stuart.
Hi, Mike. It's Stuart in Hampshire. Fantastic show, as always. And lovely to you, Julia, all your colleagues, Ian later, covering this rather dismal election. But let me say, way better than the Beeb.
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, they're really doing a lot of smug sort of smile. I mean, very unlike 2019. You know, whenever you switch to BBC in 2019, they did not look happy at all. But they're looking a lot happier this time around. So I'm very happy for you guys. You can have a nice night and enjoy. But I'll tell you what, let's talk about Labour and like the likes of Angela Rayner and David Lammy. What sort of job does Angela Rayner get?
Well, she's going to be the Deputy Prime Minister.
But is that it, though?
Well, she'll be levelling up and she'll be in charge of housing.
Right.
So there's a big promise.
How appropriate.
Yes.
She knows a lot about housing.
Yes. Yes, she does know a lot about housing, Mike. Yeah. So she's going to be in charge, and it's the 300,000 homes. You know, it's the big part of the big promise of Keir Starmer. Yeah. And she's going to be deputising for him at PMQs when he's away, when he's on a foreign trip. Yeah. So she's going to be a big part of this government.
And that'll be soon because he's off to NATO, isn't he?
Yeah.
In a few days' time.
Yeah. Yeah. We've got the King's Speech to go, I think, afterwards. So, but yes, she'll be a big figure in this government. Make no mistake about it. And there are many Conservative voters, Reform voters, who think that she is of the left of the party. Yeah. You'll see pushback, particularly I think what you'll see on Gaza, Palestine. There'll be a huge amount of pressure on Keir Starmer.
Well, remember we saw her before the election, proper kind of you know right at the beginning of the campaign, talking to that group of Muslim community leaders. Yeah.
Well, her constituency is going to be a very interesting one to look out for. I think it's one of those ones where if say a Workers' Party candidate was having a very good night, that's the sort of place they could do well, or at least threaten her a bit.
Yeah.
In Tower Hamlets, it's also looking. They've got a Amjad Mansour, who's an independent backed by Galloway, and it's expected that he should do very well in this election because there's a huge amount of upset about Rushnara Ali, the Labour MP there, supporting Keir Starmer by not going for a ceasefire vote. So that is it's not the. You know, it's one interesting subplot to this election is the Muslim vote. How well does it turn out for George Galloway and Galloway-inspired left, anti-Israel voters,
pro-Palestine voters? To watch all that. Coming up after the break, we're going to have Baroness Claire Fox, Peter Cardwell will return, Roger Gewoldt will be here, of course, as well. We want to take your calls. We might take a couple of calls actually, and some voice notes too. 0344 499 1000. We are up all night. It's an election special. It's a Labour landslide. The lefties are taking over. We want to hear from you. Let's get it on.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to the all-nighter. It is, of course, an election special with me, Mike Graham, and I'm with you all the way through until 4 o'clock. We should be seeing a few big names falling by the wayside between now and then. Peter Cardwell's here with us. Roger Gewolf joins us as well. Peter, it looks as though, as we just said before the break there, that Gillian Keegan might be the first sort of proper cabinet casualty.
Yes, the Liberal Democrats think that they have taken her seat, and actually in the last few minutes Marcus Jones, who was a relatively senior Conservative, he has lost his seat as well in the constituency of let me see here, Nuneaton. Right. Labour have gained that, so they're up now to 12 seats. And yeah, the only Conservative at the moment who has been elected is Mark Francois in Raleigh and Wickford.
Yes, so he's the sort of first of the holdouts. I mean, I said that's proper breaking news. The Tories have actually won a seat.
Yeah. He's the leader of the Conservative Parliamentary Party at the moment, is Mark Francois.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, so committee of one. Roger, what are you seeing here? I mean, it's great news for Reform, isn't it? I mean, considering that they only really started this campaign 6 weeks ago, they didn't expect to have to do it so quickly. Nigel Farage at the beginning wasn't even running. You know, he certainly livened up the campaign, didn't he?
Absolutely. And considering also, Mike, that in the last week they've been the subject of black ops, dirty tricks, I don't know exactly what.
Right.
But this whole thing with Mr. Parker and the racial...
Channel 4 News,
and the racial slurs and the rest, which frankly affect every party. I can only imagine, and forgive me, Greens people, you know, I'm not singling you out, but I can only imagine what some people in the Greens say about fossil fuel company executives and other capitalist type. You find them everywhere, and I think it was really unfair to conflate that with Nigel and Reform.
Yeah.
And it hurt him.
Well, it did hurt him, but it didn't hurt him, you know, fatally, which a lot of people thought it would do, which tells you how strong the Reform vote is, Peter. I mean, it's quite resilient, isn't it? Because
it is
a lot of people see Reform as a kind of antidote to Westminster politics, to, you know, politics as usual, and the kind of people who are out of touch with reality. They see Nigel Farage as a kind of rock star celebrity figure, don't they?
Yes, they do, and that's why Reform have done so well. They've come second in a number of seats. They've pushed the Conservatives into fourth. And actually, just on the point with Greens, there have been a number of Green councillors, what we've seen in the last few weeks, who have said things that are Islamist as well.
And they lost a few anti-Semitic as well.
Yes, exactly,
And they also lost a few candidates, didn't they, over the course of the kind of election period.
Yes, they did.
Just a little bit of breaking news. We're asking about Basildon and Billericay. Apparently, there is a full recount going on there, according to the BBC. Yeah. So that would suggest, would it not, that Richard Holden, the Conservative Party chairman, is pretty close to perhaps losing that.
Well, this was always going to be tight. The exit poll puts him at a 56% chance of holding his seat, but very, very interesting in regard to Richard Holden. No love lost there between many Conservatives and him, because he was the single candidate in a single candidate shortlist for that relatively safe constituency. What so many Conservatives are finding this evening is that there's no such thing as a safe constituency, even for you know, very large majorities in previously Conservative constituencies.
Exactly right. And Roger, you study these things around the world, particularly here and in the States. You know, is this, do you think, a kind of sea change in the way that British politics is going to be conducted in the future? Because obviously Nigel Farage says Reform is making a bridgehead here. They're only going to get maybe 10 seats, maybe 12 seats, but they're sort of preparing for the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing if you think about it. 4 years ago, we Brexited to get away from the woke, oppressive, lefty, over-regulated, red-taped European Union.
Right.
And now we've got Europe acting like Brexiteers, moving to the right, while we are clearly this evening moving towards what it is that we got away from.
And hardening up their rules on immigration as well.
Yeah, and we're moving towards what it is that we left 4 years ago. It's insane.
Yeah.
It's not so queer as folk.
Indeed. A bit of breaking news.
Labour has just gained Darlington as well. No massive shock there. This is a red wall seat with a smallish majority, but the previous MP there, Peter Gibson, has certainly been someone who at least privately has been critical of Rishi Sunak's leadership, so very interesting on that one.
Yeah, I've got them gaining Nuneaton from the Tories as well, which I think we already knew. Coming up after the break, we'll talk to Isabel Oakeshott, so she may give us an insight into what's being said inside of Reform. one of the things that has been said is that Nigel Farage is expecting he might get as many as 6 million votes. But is there any possibility that we see Reform coming second a lot, as we have already, and we don't see them doing quite as well, perhaps in the numbers of seats?
Yeah, I mean, I think David Bull said it all tonight on another channel, that one of the first things they need to do is bring in proportional representation, because the first past the post system is getting really quite not fit for purpose for us.
Well, I think there are going to be a lot of people, especially Reform UK voters, who look at the number of votes that Reform UK get versus the number of seats they get. And there could be a situation where Reform UK gets double the number of votes that have been cast for the Liberal Democrats. But because of the electoral system, they'll get 7 or 8 seats, whereas the Liberal Democrats will get about 6.
Let's bring in, sorry to interrupt you, Roger, let's bring in Baroness Claire Fox, who's been waiting patiently. She's up in the northwest of England. Baroness Claire Fox, welcome to the all-nighter. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Mike. Quite energised by the fact that this election, whilst the substantial main parties are dull as dishwater, everything else is quite exciting.
Yeah, I think so. I agree with you. It's the most galvanised I've felt, really. I mean, 2019 was interesting, but this is sort of multi-level interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. One of the things that's funny, I'm flicking between channels, I'm listening to you and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But one of the things that's really interesting about the kind of mainstream channels is they're kind of in a state of shock that populism is popular.
I know.
You know what I mean? It's never dawned on them. Everyone's kind of like, oh, there seems to be some interest in the Populist Party.
Yeah, and they've been talking Reform down for the last 4 weeks. They've been saying, oh, they probably won't win any seats. I said this to Nigel Farage, we had him on the other day. I said, first of all, you weren't going to run. Then they said you weren't going to get a seat, because you never do. Then they said you might win 1 seat. Then they said you might win 3 seats. Now it looks like 13.
I know. Mind you, I'm until they actually start coming through as seats, I don't quite believe it myself. But one thing I think, you were talking about Nigel Farage is a bit of a rock star, and I know that's true, but I actually think that the voters are kind of quite canny on this. You know, they want to change politics in a different way. They want political realignment, the same kind of political realignment they wanted in 2019 and in 2016. Yeah. And Reform is the vehicle for it. You know, it's not just that people are like, Nigel Farage, and I'm not going to be critical or anything. Right. They know how to exert their agency in these things. You know, this is a statement of saying the Labour Party are not good enough, we don't trust them. Yeah. And the absolute betrayal of the Tories and so on. So I just think Reform have now got to live up to those expectations, but I am enjoying the exit poll 13 seats, and I'm really hoping that those come true.
Yeah, absolutely right. Roger, back to you. I mean, it is a sea change, I think, you know, because, it's far too early to talk about Reform as a third-party force, possibly, but does this bring her any closer to what Labour said they would do, which was to have proportional representation?
Yeah, I mean, because...
they won't want to do it now, will they?
No, absolutely. I mean, first past the post has always favoured the Tories, and now Labour will be the... I mean, they're the uni party after all. There's no differences, really, you know. So, but I mean, it's looking, you know, like the writing is pretty much on the wall. I heard that... I heard that Joe Biden, President Joe Biden, has sent a transatlantic cable, whatever the heck that is, already congratulating... and saying, you know, congratulations on your win and good luck in the first 100 days, Mr. Churchill.
Yeah, I'm sure that's right. Yeah, absolutely. So, Peter, what do you make of the sort of the first step? Because Reform will say this, and we'll probably hear them saying it a little bit later on in this show. The first step towards a slight change in the way that people vote in this country.
Yeah, I think there is, and I've been speaking to a very senior figure in Reform UK this evening who says that that person doesn't believe it'll be 13, thinks more sort of 7. Right. But even so, there'll be questions at Prime Minister's Question Time from time to time. Nigel Farage having MP after his name, which he almost certainly will. Yeah. Well, that gives him a legitimacy that he hasn't. Yes. I mean, he's legitimate in many people's minds, but even in greater legitimacy, he's tried for a long time to be a member of Parliament. This is a parliamentary force and a force to be reckoned with.
Gives them an agency.
Exactly, and it's come from nowhere. They'll also get money, I think, short money that opposition parties get to employ various different people and so on behind the scenes. So this this is a real watershed, I think, in Parliament. It's very, very, very difficult to get seats in Parliament if you're a small party, and certainly if you're a start-up party, which is okay, they've got the UKIP and Brexit Party heritage, but essentially they started 3 years ago. So this is really something very different, and there'll be a lot of Labour candidates as well, or Labour MPs now. People like the very first MP elected, Bridget Phillipson, Shadow Education Secretary. Reform came second to her, only about 8,000 between them off the top of my head, and people like her will be saying behind the scenes to Keir Starmer, you see these people, they're a threat to us. In the next election, or maybe the election after that, they'll be even more of a challenge. So we need to think about the people who vote for them, and it's not just former Conservatives who vote for Reform UK, it's former Labour, it's former Leave, lots of different people, and that threat to Labour in the longer term needs to be thought about now.
Of course. Claire, back to you. How do you think the House of Lords is going to welcome Mr Farage into the Palace of Westminster?
Well, I actually think that, well, first of all, we've bizarrely had Rishi Sunak announce his peerage list tonight. So there's some very peculiar people on that. So the Lords is going to be drowning out with even more peers. I mean, God knows there's too many of us as it is. I am going to enjoy, not just Farage, but even if it's a handful of Reform MPs, because you've just been talking about the voting system, what is remarkable is that with first past the post they could have done it. And there's a kind of snobbishness about Reform that really is vile, kind of sneering, you know.
It's terrible, isn't it?
You know, it's like the voters, it's all a bit unsavoury. And all I can say is, if you want a kind of earthquake, you're going to have to put up with these MPs are going to come in and say unpalatable populist things. And I do know that in the House of Lords, when I say things like that, there's a whole range of people who just really despise
their nose. Oh, I know. Absolutely.
I enjoy it so much, winding them up, right?
No, of course.
So you can imagine having a load of Reform MPs up the corridor, but Reform will have to also grow up. And Nigel has said he's going to do this, so just to say, it's got to become a democratic party. It's got to have local groups. It's got to professionalise itself. But it's not just Reform. It's the mood of the voters that is significant.
Claire, we've got to run. Lib Dems have gained...
the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to the election night all-nighter. We're going to be here all the way through the night. I'm here till 4, then I'm back again at 7. In between, you've got Ian Collins. It's an Ian Collins sandwich, people might say. Coming up in this section, we've got Isabel Oakeshott, Talk's international editor. Scarlett McGuire's back from JL Partners. Theo Usherwood, of course, is here as well. Let's get a voice note from Amanda.
Hi, Mike. It's Amanda. I'm watching you, and gutted that Labour are going to win because we all know what's coming. But really, really pleased that Reform are making some headway. Rishi Sunak, he played a blinder, didn't he? 4th of July elections. Had it been November, I think then Reform would have probably nailed more seats. Good luck to us all, because I think we're going to need it. Loving your coverage.
Thank you very much indeed, Amanda. Yeah, we're going to be doing this all the way through the night. We're going to get some big names, I think, coming up very shortly. We're waiting for a recount result in Billericay, which is where Richard Holden, the Conservative chair, is trying to win a seat. And also, of course, we're expecting Keir Starmer's seat anytime soon. And we're expecting a load of other big names coming in after about 3 o'clock. It could be carnage for the Tory party. Theo Usherwood's here, Scarlett McGuire's here. Anything happening since we last saw you?
Yeah, I think quite an interesting potential health warning about the seat count for Reform UK from the exit poll. So Barnsley North, the exit poll had them as 99% likelihood as winning, and now Labour's won it pretty comfortably. Labour's won it with an 8,000 majority. So, you know, let's see what happens with the rest of the seats that the exit poll had, Reform UK winning, but interesting.
Okay, well, let's go to Isabel Oakeshott and see what she can tell us, because obviously we're looking at all sorts of situations all around the country. Isabel, very good evening, good morning, I should say to you, sorry.
Good morning, and yes, Scarlett is right. I mean, I tweeted a good couple of hours ago now about some big caveats about the exit poll in relation to the number of seats that Reform is projected to win. It's a difficult one, this, because it's a new party, and because of the way these exit polls are modelled, that figure of 13 could be a huge overestimate, but it could also be an underestimate, which I realise is not hugely helpful to our listeners. But I think it just means to say that everybody who's thinking, well, this has been a truly phenomenal result in terms of seats, we really yet don't know how it's going to play out. I have to say that the party has been taken by happy surprise at the scale of the Reform support showing in some of these northern areas, in Sunderland and Newcastle, coming a really solid second in seats where, whilst there were very good teams up there, they certainly weren't considered by the party leadership as kind of target seats. There weren't lots of kind of Nigel Farage rallies up there. There weren't huge resources poured into those seats. So that is a very, very interesting indicator of where the party could go, given time and resources to build what Nigel Farage has promised to be a movement.
Yes, and we've already heard from Nigel tonight saying to what looked like a group of I don't know if it was in Clacton, but he was addressing a group of Reform staff, at least, I think, saying that, you know, this is a very, very big moment in British politics, and I think he would say they're doing better than he expected them to do, and there's talk of maybe 6 million votes being cast for them.
Well, I think that's realistic. I imagine he's in Clacton, and there will be his team up there, and lots of people want to be part of the excitement in that particular constituency. But there's really interesting things happening in quite unexpected places. There's a real possibility of having to have a recount in Yvette Cooper's seat. Yvette's one of the longest marchers in the potential new Keir Starmer government. You know, she's actually held cabinet positions in the last Labour regime, and she's under a great deal of pressure there from Reform in Pontefract. Quite a surprise. And how that will play out, I don't know. Sometimes with recounts, if there are recounts, there ends up being quite a big margin for whoever eventually wins. You know, you think a recount recount would only take place if there's a handful, a 30 vote difference, but actually sometimes it ends up being many hundreds or even 1,000.
Yeah, indeed. Well, because we're looking at...
But it's nobody saw that one coming, let's put it that way.
And Billericay looks like they're having a recount as well.
So, I mean, just extraordinary and unexpected things are happening. And, Nigel Farage will say this is a real message to the establishment. The party has been absolutely hammered by the media in last few weeks. The kind of campaign to smear the party and to try to root out anything possible negative that could be said has been quite something to behold. And of course, it's a new party, it's a start-up. Of course there have been mistakes. Of course it's rough around the edges. And of course, unfortunately, it's attracted some people that it would rather not have anywhere near it. But I think what this shows, the scale of these results coming in second place time and again in the seats that have been declared, is that ordinary voters have seen through that smear campaign and they are not satisfied with what the two main parties, the Tories and the Lib Dem, Tories and Labour have to offer them, although of course the Lib Dems are doing very well as well tonight.
Yes, I mean, you might even say that's a bit of a sort of a protest vote in a way. Theo, I can see you scribbling furiously there. What have you got for us?
Just on the Lib Dems, it looks like we have our second cabinet scalp. It's Alex Chalk, the Justice Secretary down in Cheltenham. It looks like he's being beaten by the Liberal Democrats. Lib Dems now confident of winning at Cheltenham. It's a seat that they've held before. Nuneaton, Labour haven't won it since 1997. It looks like they've now won that, seen as a key bellwether, bellwether seat. And just to Isabel's point, what's interesting is that, and this is, I think, about the infrastructure and reform not being able to campaign in the north of England. I think what's going to happen now is that Tory donors are going to seriously look at whether they're best placing their money in the Conservative Party, or whether actually, if they want to see their money get some bang for their buck, actually start putting their money into reform and backing Nigel Farage. Can Nigel Farage now use this time to build infrastructure within the party, get the party in councils when we have those council elections in the midterm? Can he build his party up so that when he goes again in 2029 he's got the money, he's got the backing, he's got the resources to take that next step and make reform a real
well, as Claire Fox just said, they need to sort of professionalise the outfit altogether, don't they? Because I mean they'll say, well, we didn't have a lot of time to select a lot of the candidates, but a lot of the candidates they did select probably turned out to be duds.
Yeah, and they didn't even manage to get candidates everywhere. I mean, one thing I've just spotted is of them doing very well though is Castle Point. So Castle Point in Essex, there was a bit of attention this before the election. People gave it some write-ups saying it was going to be a three-way fight between Conservatives, Reform and Labour. So the Conservatives have held it, but there was a 34% swing towards Reform.
Wow.
So Reform not far behind. The Conservative majority wiped out, 26,000 down to 3,000. Absolutely astonishing.
That is incredible. If you're still there, Isabel, I mean, is there one particular place you think that Reform are looking to as a kind of, a bellwether? If they get it, that could mean that they are going to get up to sort of 12 or 13 and maybe more.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but what I would say is that there's a handful. I mean, there's one in Barnsley. I know a result has come in Barnsley which has not been very good for Reform, but there's a neighbouring seat there that is potentially very exciting for Reform. I'm here in Boston and Skegness tonight, where Party Chairman Richard Tice is standing. I think it's worth pointing out that the Tory majority in Boston and Skegness is the second. It is actually the second safest Tory seat numerically in the whole of the UK. So that is a hell of a mountain to climb. I don't know whether or not he will achieve that, but if he does, that would be very, very indicative.
Yeah, absolutely right. Isabel, thanks very much indeed. We haven't really talked about Scotland yet, Theo. Let's have a look at what's going on there, because the SNP losing heavily to what looks like Labour. I saw one projection in which it said the Tories will actually end up with more seats in Scotland than the SNP will.
And that would be incredible.
Which would be ridiculous.
The SNP, just to manage expectations about where we were before, going into this election, the SNP were hoping that they would get more seats than Labour, and they were going to use that to then try and shoehorn a second independence referendum.
Yes.
That was their mandate for a second independence referendum, demanding that from Keir Starmer. And now it looks like, given the strength of feeling against the SNP, they've had that monopoly over power now since 2014, following on from the first independence referendum, now seems to have been smashed. Labour back in play, but also the unionist vote, those who don't want, of course, to see the breakup of the union, coming out for the Conservative Party as well. It's looking like a very bad night for the SNP.
It certainly is, and as of course you would expect, the people who support the union will say, well, if you wanted this to be a referendum on whether there should be another referendum, then you've lost another one, haven't you?
Yeah, I think so. But one thing I would say is that I think we've seen independence decline in terms of its salience in terms of Scottish politics. I think we got a sign of this in the Rutherglen and Hamilton by-election, where Labour took it with a huge swing off the SNP. I think that was probably foreshadowing some of the things that we're going to see tonight. But it seems to me that the voters in Scotland are not so much voting on the issue of independence this time around, more about how the country is literally governed and the things that are going on in it at the moment.
And somebody did point out to me that if it is true that they end up with about 8 or possibly 10 SNP MPs in Westminster, they could fit them all in a motorhome.
Yeah, but the thing is that the SNP have spent so long. They could. It could be all a static caravan.
Static caravan,
put them on the edge of a cliff and they can look out to sea. But the problem is with the SNP is they've spent so long banging on about independence that actually they haven't realised they've been in Hollywood. They've been the governing party. And what's happened to healthcare? What's happened to education? It's all fallen apart.
This was the same problem for Labour in Wales, but it doesn't seem. We haven't seen the Wales results yet, but it doesn't seem to have harmed Labour.
No, I feel like it probably won't harm Labour in Wales in the same way, but the SNP are definitely sort of getting that anti-government backlash that the Conservatives are also suffering on. There's obviously other stuff going on with the Conservatives as well. There are a couple of other interesting things with reform coming through. So Blackpool South, they've really improved their performance from the by-election. So they got 17% in the by-election just a couple of months ago, now on 28%, and they came second in Telford, beating the Conservatives.
That is a big jump, isn't it? Because people said in all of the by-elections that no matter what Richard Tice was saying,
their actual general election result.
The polling was, they were polling sort of higher and higher, but they weren't really getting the results of the ballot box. But they now seem to be getting that.
That's exactly right. So you would have quite a lot. Actually, I feel we feel slightly vindicated in my firm because we released a report last November saying that the Conservatives were in trouble with the Reform Party, and everyone pretty much dismissed us out of hand, saying the Reform vote's not real.
But again,
it's not
like Claire Fox says, a lot of that dismissal comes from prejudice, in my view, of reform, because an awful lot of political commentators just kind of hold their noses and kind of dismiss reform. Oh, they're a bit sort of shabby. They're run by these chancers, and nobody really likes them. They're not part of the establishment. I think it's very unfair.
But I think it speaks to what a tremendous campaign they've had, though, because I think there's been, if you think about it, so part of the reason why commentators were saying that was because UKIP would overperform in by-elections relative to their general election performance, and Reform is completely bucking that trend, which shows that they've had probably the most, in terms of, we know actually they've been the main source of movement in the polls in the campaign, in a campaign where I think both the Conservative Party and Labour have been fairly lacklustre, I think probably quite deliberately on Labour Party's part, because they've so not wanted to scare the horses, but all the movement's been with Reform, and I think this is what a lot of these results are showing.
Yeah, absolutely, and they've been very dominant on social media, haven't they? I mean, TikTok, billions and billions of views, and very sort of big grip on younger people.
Yes, it's the younger people, and of course, we've always seen reformers going for the older voters, places like Clacton, but actually what Nigel Farage has done, and working very well with his team on social media, particularly on TikTok, where the other parties just have no real presence to try and win over younger voters, because that's where these future elections are going to be fought. And they just do some very simple videos, quite like what's been going on in France with Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella, where he has a huge following on social media, particularly to win over those younger voters, because that's where the elections of the future are going to be won. And I think one of the problems with the Conservative Party is that they keep on narrow. They become more and more narrow in the slice of the electorate that they want to win. And in this election, they really hit young people. So we had national service. We had we'll do some tax breaks, but you're only going to get a tax break on your pension. They weren't speaking enough to young people.
And there was a sort of perception, wasn't there, that the Tory party is for older people and it's punishing younger people as a result.
But it's actually, if you go out there in the country and you speak to younger people, yes, there are those who go to Glastonbury, but there are also younger people who don't go to Glastonbury.
Yeah, like the ones who can't afford it.
Well, we polled 16, 17-year-olds. Obviously, Keir Starmer, it's been rumoured he may give the vote, and we found that 1 in 4 16, 17-year-olds would vote Reform, and amongst 16, 17-year-old men, they were neck and neck with Labour.
Yeah, I was talking to some people around here, and apparently in various schools around the nation, they've been having sort of mock elections, and this guy was saying he's got 2 kids at 2 different schools. One of them's private, one of them's grammar, and they both voted and elected Reform.
Wow.
In the school. So, you know, we're going to go to Ashfield for Lee Anderson. It's coming in live. Let's have a look.
Wow.
Daniel Holmes, Liberal Democrats, 619. Ria Keane, Labour Party, 11,553. Debbie Solomon, Conservative Party candidate, 3,271.
Well, Debbie.
Jason Zadrosny, the Ashfield Independent, putting people before politics, 6,276. The number of ballot papers rejected was 102. The vacant seat is 1. The electorate was 68,929. Ballot papers issued, 39,986. And the turnout was 58.1%. I do hereby declare that Lee Anderson is duly elected.
There you go. Lee Anderson's the first Reform win for Ashfield. I wasn't sure from his body language there whether he'd actually won it. He was disguising that rather well, but that's big, isn't it?
It's huge.
Yeah.
And Labour had targeted that seat. Keir Starmer personally targeted that seat. They wanted to take Ashfield from Lee Anderson. Of course, he defected from the Conservative Party. It was seen as a point of principle if they could, if Labour could actually oust Lee Anderson or stop him from winning that seat, because of course it was his seat. He was the incumbent candidate, but Labour failed, and he disguised it. Yeah, he looked as if for a moment there as if he'd lost it. It was a great poker face there from Lee Anderson, but no, he's won. He's
amazing. So Lee Anderson's won. I mean, that's the big news of the night so far.
I think it is. It's huge news, and actually, I think there can be quite a lot of snobbishness towards Lee Anderson switching parties. Because obviously, he started off as an advisor to a Labour MP and then Conservative. But actually, I think this is interesting, and it speaks to something we were saying earlier about the sorts of problems Keir Starmer's going to have in government. Because actually, Lee Anderson's journey mirrors an awful lot of voters in this country, which is Labour to Leave to Boris and now to Reform, and that's clearly where quite a lot of voters are, and that's going to become an increasing headache for Keir Starmer.
That's very interesting indeed. Let's get a voice note from Chloe, if we can. Don't have to if we can't. Don't worry, we'll come back. We'll come back with Chloe's voice note, but that's the big news. Ashfield is a win for the Reform Party. The first seat for the Reform Party, 17,062, is a gain for Reform and Lee Anderson. I'm Mike Graham. This is Up All Night with Talk, and it's an election special. We'll be back after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. It's an all-nighter. We're going to be here for the duration, and we've already got some very exciting news. Ashfield is a win for Lee Anderson, so Reform get their first seat, a massive gain, of course, from Labour. Let's get a voice note from Chloe.
Hi, Mike. Great coverage tonight from you and Julia and Peter Cardwell. I just want to say the story of the night is not Labour. It's not even Tory. The story of the night is Reform. Bring on 2029. I'm there for it. Great show. Loving your work.
I think you're...
Harry in Hampshire.
Sorry, Chloe. I see him talking over you there, sorry. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And the big story is Reform, because at the end of the day, not only are we going to be looking at what seats they've taken from Labour or what seats they've taken from the Tories, but initially as well, where that leaves the Tory party. I've still got Scarlett Maguire here, Theo Rushford as well. I think Keir Starmer's report is imminent. His count is about to be, I think, announced. Paul Scully, meanwhile, is joining us, former Conservative Minister, of course. Paul, very good morning to you.
Hiya, how are you?
Yeah, very well indeed. Now, you took a decision earlier on in the, I think it was even before the campaign, that you probably weren't going to be running again. So, I mean, we're watching a pretty poor night for the Conservative Party. Labour, funnily enough, are not really unhappy about what's happened, but in some ways they're not really the story tonight, because we've just seen Lee Anderson winning in Ashfield, and for me anyway, I think the Reform size of the vote is going to be the story, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about the breaking of the two-party system. You know, you're likely to... We're all predicting the fact that you got the lowest vote share between the two parties since year dot, I think. So people going elsewhere, you know, still come back to the point, as I've said, probably on your programme, but elsewhere, that you know, it's not about Reform, it's about Nigel Farage, actually, because he's the one that's come into this, said, and as Chloe just said there, about 2029, he's basically saying, look, you guys look after yourself for a little while. I'm coming back for a big job in 2029. It's about him. It's not about... He's tapping into disaffection, anger and frustration without really any solutions. He's the sort of right-wing version of the Lib Dems on the other side.
Yes, but I mean, he's pressurising, as he always has done, the rest of the political system. And he was majorly responsible for David Cameron having a referendum about whether to leave the European Union, in the same way that the Brexit Party was, you know, absolutely kind of, you know, very, very fundamental to the way that Britain existed within the European Parliament and all of that, you know. And so, I mean, I think he's a bit more than that now, particularly if he wins in Clacton. Because at the end of the day, you're talking about the Conservative sort of heart and soul, and where is it?
Well, that's a fair question, but I think first of all, what we need to do is, the reason that we've allowed Nigel Farage to come in, the reason that we've given up an 80-seat majority, is partly because of the big issues that we've had to go since 2019, COVID and Ukraine, etc. But we've shot ourselves in the foot so many times. It's about perceived competence as well. So it's the competence bit that we've got to get right and show people that we're actually competent first, before we then decide what kind of Conservatives we want to be.
And I think the perception of the country as well, Paul, is a thing, and that's probably played into the way people have voted tonight, because in a way it's been sort of a rejection, if you like, of the two main parties, and as you've just said, it's maybe the creation of a change in the system, but people look around and they can't find anything that works. You know, the trains don't work, you know, there's channel immigration problems, there's legal immigration problems, there's NHS problems, prisons crisis, you know, crime crisis. There's an awful lot of things that don't work, and whether anybody wants to perceive it like that or not inside the Tory party, they're going to get the blame.
Yeah, and there's you know, so much that we need to work through this, because it's not even just about the last couple of years, because actually I think we've been coming to this. I think Theo said something earlier about the fact that, you know, not talking to about young people and to young people enough. We've stored up some of these problems in terms of public services as well. That's been exacerbated by those big events that I just talked about. Because if you go to France, you're seeing a similar disaffection. If you go to America, you're seeing a similar disaffection. It's almost the government that's left holding the COVID baby around the world that's suffering as on top of this. But we've added an extra layer because of the mistakes that we've made as a party. We've got to show some humility now and actually say, you know what, It's not just this vacuous, I'm listening, but actually we've got to really have a bit of soul searching about what we now do before we start going on about lurching one way or another. Because the problem is as well, if you look at the result of the polls that we've had, and by the way, I think we've had too many polls, I'm sorry, Sky, but in the 6 weeks, because they're starting to lead opinion rather than report on it, in my view. But they're actually, the polls, when you see what happened since 2019, half of our vote seems to be going towards reform, but the other half clearly goes the other way. And so if we just do a lurch to the right, we lose the other side as well.
Yeah, but what actually happens post this election then? You know, when Keir Starmer's out there setting out what his next plan is for the next 100 days, you know, who's running the Tory party? I mean, it may be that you lose the chair, it may be that you lose quite a lot of senior cabinet ministers, including Jeremy Hunt. It looks like Gillian Keegan's already gone. You know, who's actually going to be running the party?
Well, it sounds like from, I think it was it the Times that are reporting that Rishi's due to resign tomorrow. I don't know anything. I'm actually not even in the country. I'm working now. I've got a new job.
Oh, right. Good. Well done.
I'm in Gibraltar. Sorry. I'm an hour ahead of you. But it sounds like Rishi's going to announce tomorrow that he's going. And if that is the case, I would hope that he would then stay on to oversee a leadership election, because we don't want to create the vacuum that you rightly describe. I think it's probably right that he goes, but he does need to do it in an orderly fashion.
Yeah, and as far as Keir Starmer is concerned, I mean, he'll obviously be swept in on a wave of sort of euphoria, but he's got a big problem on his hands in that, one, most of the people that he's going to be bringing into government with him have never been in government, and two, he has got all of those problems to solve.
Yeah, I genuinely don't think he's ready. I think he was ready for the election campaign. We gave him that, but I don't think he's ready for government. He's not been tested. He's not been road tested. His ideas haven't been road tested. He's been this sort of holding them in vase, as it's been described, and just safety first. And he will be tested. And the fact of having such a big majority, oppositions always come from somewhere. And if we don't do it, his own party will. The vacuum will always be filled. So he's not going to have very long honeymoon, I don't think.
And who do you think is going to emerge as the next Tory leader then after Rishi Sunak? Who would you like it to be?
I'll be honest, Mike. I think we need to wait and see who's actually who comes in. I think, but I will be looking for someone, not an ideologue, someone first of all who have faith to actually unify and lead the party, and let the party then do that work about what kind of Conservatives they want to be. But they've got to be a strong leader first that not just gets the trust of the party, but can appeal to people outside the party as well. We've got to speak to a wider audience.
Yeah, I think so. Paul Scully, thank you very much indeed. Former London Minister, probably Tory Business Minister, of course, as well. Rachel says, good morning, Mike. Really enjoying the election coverage from Talk. So refreshing. Pleasantly surprised that Reform seems to be coming in second in several seats, but it's official. The lefties have taken over the asylum. Roll on 2029. And Kev from Paynton says, is the Speaker of the House allowed to give more questions to Reform during PMQs because of the high percentage of votes across the country as opposed to the number of seats? That's one for you, Theo.
No.
Sorry about that.
Nigel Farage isn't going to get one question in PMQs. It's going to be the new leader of the Conservative Party. But I just point you, this is a good one actually, it's a good question, because I point you to the Hartlepool result.
Yeah.
Labour win it from the Tories, but if you add the Conservative vote and the Reform vote together, it comes down to just a handful of votes separating the two. And that's going to put huge pressure when we have this Conservative leadership campaign now on both Reform, well, I think firstly on the Conservative Party and whoever takes over, to find some sort of deal, to find some sort of alliance with Nigel Farage and Reform, because if right-wing politics is going to exist in this country, it will exist in the media, of course. It will be here on Talk, Home of Common Sense. But if it's to exist in the House of Commons as a force, there has got to be some sort of deal with Nigel Farage.
Some kind of crossover.
They can't carry on like this. Otherwise, they're going to just cannibalise each other.
Right, and presumably as well, Nigel Farage, because I think he's quite enjoyed this campaign, and I think he's been quite pleasantly surprised by the size of support for him. He doesn't really feel, I don't think now, from what I understand, that he wants to become part of the Tory party, but he might want some Tories to come and join Reform. Would he?
Yeah, and I guess some of them might be tempted, especially after this election result, and especially if they're feeling them under renewed pressure, depending on the direction of the party. I think we're expecting quite a long, drawn drawn-out leadership contest, so you never know, you may get more defections in that period if they're not going to sort of merge straight away. I do think it is worth saying, though, so we've been talking a lot about sort of a Labour underperformance in terms of national vote share. They are still getting record swings towards them. Now, you might say that's more because of a collapse in the Conservative vote and Reform splitting it, but it is still quite remarkable. There's just been 2 records for Conservative to Labour swing at a general election, broken within sort of minutes of each other.
Right, interesting. A lot of people have been very complimentary about you two, by the way.
Oh, that's nice.
Lily says this, great show, love your guests Scarlett and Theo, very well informed and honest discussion. I don't usually get accused of that, so it's obviously down to you guys. Thank you. Let's get a voice note from Dan, who's in Bahrain. Hello, Dan.
Hi, Mike. It's 4:30 here in Bahrain. I'm enjoying the brilliant coverage from talkTV. I don't know how many seats Reform are going to win, but I think the most encouraging thing, and the thing that Nigel Farage is going to be able to build on, is the fact that he's got such a huge percentage of the vote in these places.
Yeah, I think people are going to be very, very encouraged by that, of course. We've also discovered, and you can talk us through this, Theo, that Keir Starmer placed a bet, did he not, on whether Lee Anderson would be able to win in Ashfield.
So he went to do a Q&A at the Daily Mirror, which is, of course, a left-leaning paper, and he was asked by one of their columnists, Paul Routledge, whether...
Because Paul Routledge still going, he's been around for years.
He asked whether Labour could oust Reform Lee Anderson from his seat in Ashford. I don't know if we've got the...
Yeah, we have got the clip, so let's have a listen.
Do you think that Lee Anderson will retain his seat?
No, I don't.
That's on it?
Although Jonathan Ashworth just lost a tenner, didn't he, recently?
I'm a poor man's peers, so 50 quid.
50 quid.
Right.
But look, he's drifted from the Labour Party into the Tory Party, to the right of the Tory, now out the other door, to the right of Reform. There is no future in that. And Reform doesn't provide the answers to, you know, the very many challenges that people are facing across the country.
Well, they obviously supply the answers for the people in Ashfield.
Well, he's got no future. He's got 5 more years in Parliament.
This is obviously more evidence that politicians should not make bets.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I took from it.
I mean, we're not going to even get into the rash of bets. I mean, that investigation presumably is still going on, isn't it?
Still going on, and it's still going on, and we don't yet know. You know, Rishi Sunak managed to dampen that down, of course, the Keir Starmer comment.
But he sort of dampened it down by putting it off, didn't he? Because he said, oh, a Rochdale declaration, George Galloway, let's go to that.
Oh, very cool.
This is getting exciting, isn't it?
Not going to want to leave it for all. So,
I hereby declare that Paul Waugh is duly elected.
So Galloway's lost.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the returning officer, the counting staff, and of course the police. Special thanks go to my agent Tom Besford, and of course our campaign organiser Neil Emmett.
So he goes back to Labour?
Goes back to Labour. That's a huge blow to George Galloway.
That is a huge blow to George Galloway. And it also tells you something, doesn't it? Because, I mean, I'll admit to getting something wrong, actually, because I thought this Gaza business was going to be a huge issue for Labour, particularly in some places like Rochdale.
Well, I would say one thing they've done very well, actually, and if you notice, I know we talked a bit about David Lammy earlier, but he's not been on the rounds, and they've done a very good job of keeping all foreign policy out of this election, Labour. They've not touched on it at all. And if you think about what a headache that was for them, especially around the locals, they've done a really, really good job to keep that out of the headlines.
Because it kind of appeared in the manifesto, didn't it? But in a very, very sort of convoluted way. They were saying that, oh, yes, we would like to recognise Palestine as a state, but
not yet.
Not yet. Yeah.
So that was the way they did it, Mike. Was they tried to, because it's not just the Muslim vote. There is a large proportion of the Labour Party who absolutely detest Keir Starmer's stance on Gaza, and they don't like it. And Keir Starmer needed not just to try and ensure that Labour didn't get hammered by George Galloway and independent pro-Palestine candidates in this election, but he also needed to make sure that he kept the party together, and that there wasn't a split going into this election, because he needs people door-knocking and leafleting. Interesting that Galloway's gone, but I think there are going to be ructions in other seats, and we can expect some independents to get in. I'm told in Batley and Spen, Dewsbury and Batley, apologies, there is a pro-Palestine independent candidate who's looking to take that from Labour, and it's looking odds on that they're going to succeed in doing that. And I think in Tower Hamlets it's going to be a very close run thing as well. So watch out. I think George Galloway may be out, but I don't think this story is going to go. It's not going to go away at all. And I think as we go into the Parliament, and you've got pressure from Ed Davey and the Liberal Democrats on Gaza and Israel's stance, I think it's only going to ramp up as well.
Yeah, and of course in the international arena, you know, another area which neither Keir Starmer nor David Lammy really have any great expertise. I mean, I know that Keir Starmer managed to go to Normandy and not leave early. You know, maybe learn something from that. But you know, that's a very tricky area, isn't it? You know, diplomacy, international relations, going to places like the White House, going to places like Israel. You know,
I was speaking to a very senior member a couple of weeks ago. Speaking to a very senior member of the Jewish community who's involved in Labour politics, and they were telling me that there's a real frustration that Keir Starmer, OK, he's ignored it, but he's not put together a peace plan. What's he going to do? Because he's not just going to be Prime Minister here in the UK. He's going to be doing foreign trips. He's going to be going to the White House, as you say, Mike. He's going to, you know, has he got anything to say to Benjamin Netanyahu, or is he just going to sit at the sidelines and throw rocks? Or is he actually going to try and sort this situation out? He hasn't at any point actually demonstrated, this person was saying to me, that actually, as a Labour Prime Minister, he can stand on the world stage. He's just not done it. Is he going to try and sort out what's going on in Ukraine?
Well,
he hasn't said anything.
I don't think he's got any kind of skin in the game, as it were. He doesn't have anything to fall back on. He doesn't have any great military people in his team, I don't think, does he?
No, I think they've been working very hard to build that image up. I just think, going back to Rochdale, though, because you've got a bit more of a breakdown of the results, it was actually incredibly close. So, yes, George Galloway didn't get it, but it was sort of only
Whiskers.
by... exactly.
Wow. I was going to ask you, actually, I didn't give a chance to come back on the earlier comments. I think it was from Paul Scully about the polling that we've seen going on, and the polls have kind of just been too much and too often, and, you know, people have started just to look at polls and nothing else. I mean, you're a pollster.
I'm a pollster.
I mean, you know, I think when you look at polls, surely as an individual, whether you're a voter or whether you're part of the political process, you know, you get something from every poll, don't you?
I think so. I mean, I don't have a problem with so many polls. I've heard lots of people say they've got poll fatigue. I'm sure a lot of Conservative MPs didn't like looking at the polls for a very long time because they weren't looking like good news. But actually, the polls look like they were pretty right about the Conservative Party. So I think it's not, you know, it's a difficult one to spin. I think it's better to have an informed
And actually,
electorate.
the polls didn't really move that much in terms of the points difference between Labour and Conservative. They might not have spotted quite what Reform were doing.
Polling's going to carry on because hedge funds will pay for it. All the financial institutions, companies are going to pay for it because they need to know what's going on.
And the parties.
Now the parties are going to pay for it. So you can either have a public that's not informed, or you can have a, because they're still going to get the business, but you can either have a public that's not informed, or you have a public that's informed and they know what's going on. And now I know the Tories haven't liked the polls and they think, well, it's, you know, it creates this narrative that they're going to.
But then they pushed that narrative. They looked at the polls and then 3 weeks in started warning about a Labour supermajority. So they got that narrative and ran with it.
They did, and it didn't do them any good. It wasn't wrong. I mean, it wasn't wrong, was it? Let's take a call. Chris is in the northeast. Chris, very good morning to you. Hello, Chris.
Hello.
How you doing?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. Are you all right, eh?
Yeah, very well indeed. What do you want to say?
I'm just quite overwhelmed, like, by how Nigel Farage has had this party up and going for the... Wait, he's been in charge with this party for the 6 weeks or so?
Yeah, not even.
And, like... Yeah, exactly, yeah, not even 6 weeks. And, like, I think so far that the numbers are just showing that, like, changes here, like, change is already happening. And I think it's well overdue, like, well overdue. The thought is, I know Keir Starmer's going to come in, just the thought of it scares us already, though.
Yeah. What scares you the most, do you think?
Probably the thing he's not addressed more than anything else, which is probably illegal immigration. Like he's been asked so many times live on telly, like his thoughts on what he's going to do about illegal immigrations.
Right.
He can't answer the question. He just dodges the question. And again, Conservatives, Rishi Sunak, he's pretty much the same.
Yeah, well, this is the thing, and you're absolutely right. Chris, I appreciate your call, because I think we've got to run, because Ed Davies' seat is currently being announced, and he's just won, as I suppose you might expect. Let's have a listen to him.
It has been a great privilege to serve Kingston and Surbiton and this great community over many years, and I'm humbled that you've given me the chance to serve you again. So let me start by saying a big thank you.
I'm now going to wait for him to jump in.
To Sarah and all the returning officer team, and to all the staff and police who've worked so hard through the night. You are the unsung heroes of our democracy. It simply wouldn't work without you.
Yeah, people don't want to listen to him. They want to listen to me. Get rid of him. Bye-bye. Was running against... one of the people running against him was a former post office woman who we interviewed, I think, a few months back, who obviously, unfortunately, didn't unseat him.
Yes, and he's got it back in. It is difficult. You can't underestimate these independents. If you can get the media behind you, if you've got the contacts, if you've got the resources, you can do it. But it's no mean feat. And these things do happen actually, where you have people standing on very principled views. Of course, Ed Davey and his lack of action when it came to the post office scandal, when he could have actually done something. But it is very difficult just on those niche issues to do. Make no mistake, it's hard, and to get more than a few hundred votes.
Yeah, but just in the campaign money alone, right?
Just, and it's just, by the way, it's looking like Chelsea and Fulham might swing to Labour,
right.
But the Greens might have actually, this is the interesting thing, the Greens might have taken out some of Labour's vote and stopped.
Oh, really?
And it's sort of like a reverse reform, but with the Greens in this case taking out some.
Well, that Salvation poll that was done just before just before the election, the one that I think I saw the Standard kind of breaking out that the Labour Party might basically, or the Tories might only have 3 seats in London at the end of all of this, which would be pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, and it's also looking like, just on London, Upminster and Hornchurch, that was a safe Conservative seat. Is now literally a 3-way battle between Labour, the Tories and Reform. Labour could take it because, again, you end up in a similar situation to we were describing in Hartlepool, where you take a butter knife right through the Conservative vote and give half of it to Reform. They're going to have to find some sort of accommodation, the Tories and Reform. They can't carry on like this because they're not going to... It's impossible to see a way back unless there can be some sort of alliance.
Right. Absolutely. So just to recap, so Ed Davies won his seat. We've got Lee Anderson winning his seat, first one for Reform. Angela Rayner's just won her seat, I'm told, which is more breaking news. And, of course, the other breaking news is we're still waiting for the Billericay result to come in, where Richard Holder, the Conservative chair, is having a recount currently. Rob says this: Keir Starmer is going to offer nothing but pain and suffering over the next 5 years. Look out, flip-flop, Reform is coming. And one from, where are we? Joy. Hi, Mike and guest. Super show. Expected no less. Just wanted to say it really came down to the wire with my vote. Listening to Theo about the behaviour or lack of the Tories, I know I did good. Now we wait. Well, we do wait, and we wait and see how many more seats will come in for Reform, how that swing is going to be going. Send us a voice note, of course. You know how to do that. 0344 499 1000. We'll take a few more calls as we go through as well. After the break, Peter Cardwell's going to be back with us. We'll find out from him what else is expected to come up, because we're nearly at the 3 o'clock hour, which is when we should be getting a bit of an avalanche of results, which might show an awful lot of Tories out of work.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. This is the All-Nighter, and I'm Mike Graham, of course, running all the way through until 4 o'clock with you. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to start to see some big names falling, we think, if it looks as though things are going to according to plan. Peter Cardwell's here with us, though, of course. Let's have a little recap, Peter, shall we, of what we know so far.
Well, Mike, it's been a dramatic night. You've seen various people, a lot of former cabinet ministers, people like Sir Robert Buckland, Amanda Milling, for example, Conservative MPs like Paul Holmes, losing their seats with sometimes very dramatic changes in all of this, dramatic swings towards both reform and the Labour Party. There are all sorts of very interesting constituencies. Some unsurprising results. Angela Rayner's held her seat very, very strongly.
Although there was suggestion that she might struggle to do that, wasn't there?
Well, the interesting one is Yvette Cooper up there in Normanton, Pontefract, and she is in a seriously interesting position. I think Reform are running her quite close up there. Certainly Reform is saying anyway. So we'll see where we get to, but I mean the results really come in sort of thick and fast between about 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock.
Okay. And I'm going to be here between 3 and 4, and so if they haven't come in thick and fast by then, maybe I'll just stay on.
Maybe you should. Maybe you should.
Stay where he is. Basil and Billericay, there appears to be a recount going on. This is Richard Holden's apparent seat, where he's hoping to win. Conservative chair. I mean, that would be a big scalp if they lose that to Reform.
Yes, it would, and certainly the Conservative chairman's role is to run the campaign. That's essentially his job, to be in charge of Conservative.
He hasn't done a great job of that, has he?
No, he hasn't. It's been a terrible campaign for the Conservatives, and also he is very personally unpopular within Conservative circles. There are many, many Conservative people who really don't like him.
Well, Tim Montgomery's one of them. He was like, I can't really say this because I'm a Conservative. However, I'd love it if he lost his seat.
A number of Conservatives, both publicly and privately, have said that to me as well, mainly because the Basil Billericay is a notionally Conservative seat. Certainly, Richard Holden imposed himself there as the single candidate on a single candidate shortlist. They had no option but to take him. And if he doesn't win this, it's meant to be a safe seat. The exit poll says he has a 56% chance of winning, but the fact that there's a recount already, well, that would indicate that he has, it's very close, you know, there could be a few hundred votes in it, or maybe even fewer than that.
And we saw George Galloway, I suppose, which is the other highlight, or low light, depending on which way you're looking at. Paul Waugh getting that back for Labour, but apparently a very, very tiny margin of victory.
Yeah, you're talking about less than 2,000 votes, I think, off the top of my head. But certainly Paul Waugh, who is a very respected journalist, he's from that area, he's from Rochdale. George Galloway, of course, took that a few months ago in a dramatic by-election, and there were lots of different factors within that by-election. The Labour candidate was heard saying all sorts of dodgy things, and disciplinary action. Labour withdrew their support from him. Paul Waugh wasn't the candidate in that. He's now the candidate. He's now the MP for that area. And George Galloway, as has happened with him on a number of occasions, he often wins a by-election and then doesn't win at the general election.
And he had warned, hadn't he, that night in Rochdale, that he was coming for, you know, all sorts of different constituencies, the Workers' Party.
Oh, he said he was going to run for Mayor of Greater Manchester, and he was going to beat Andy Burnham and all the rest of it. But yeah, you'll forgive me.
It hasn't quite come out like that, has it?
You'll forgive me, Mike, if I'm not shedding too many tears for the demise of George Galloway as a Member of Parliament. So yeah, he is.
But the movement as well. But I think a lot of us, and I was one of them, and I'm quite happy to admit it, thought that this could become a huge problem for Labour. But as
Rishi Sunak certainly thought so. Do you remember that extraordinary speech he made on the steps of Downing Street on the Friday? We all thought he was going to call an election or something, but he was really just reacting to the fact that George Galloway had been elected as an MP. And certainly, I mean, George Galloway I don't think made much of an impact in Parliament. No. But there was this thought that the Workers' Party, I mean, they only picked up, I think, two actually council seats in the local elections a few weeks ago.
Yes.
So they're not nearly as popular a movement or as successful a nascent movement as something like Reform UK.
And there was, I suppose, as well, it was at the height of when the Israeli Gaza marches were going on, and the Free Palestine marches were going on, and we were kind of capitalising on that.
Yeah,
and
perfect storm.
And maybe people have lost a bit of interest in that, perhaps.
I think you're right. Also, Rochdale is a heavily Muslim constituency. I'm not saying for a second that all Muslims vote the same way. That's a stereotype. stereotype that's wrong. Labour will usually have the majority of Muslims generally vote for Labour.
Right.
Things have cooled off in that way. Also within their manifesto, Labour said they wanted to recognise the state of Palestine. They wanted a two-state solution. That's been their policy for some time, but the fact that they have reiterated that is nonetheless something which will make Keir Starmer more popular in many of those constituencies.
Yes, and we should mention, of course, the big seat the Reform have taken thus far. Lee Anderson in Ashfield, holding on to that seat, having switched from Conservative to Reform while he was in it.
Well, yes, he lost the whip from the Conservatives because of what people saw as racist remarks. I certainly did. Many people didn't. But anyway, then he was essentially chucked out of the Conservative Party. Then he became a Reform MP, their only MP. He has won that comfortably in Ashfield, and we'll see other constituencies as well. But what's interesting from Reform UK's perspective is that the exit poll at 10 o'clock, which of course is now 5 hours ago, I think they're going to revise it fairly soon, because they said Reform UK would win 13 seats.
Right.
Well, 2 of those seats have not been won by Reform already. We're looking at Hartlepool, and there's one other that's off the top of my head, I can't remember.
Is it Barnsley?
It is, I think you're right.
Yeah.
So they Hartlepool, for example, was won by an 8,000 majority by Labour, so that's 2 already. And actually, speaking to a senior person in Reform a couple of hours ago, that person told me that they thought more like 7 rather than 13. But even so, Reform
7 would still be a heck of a show.
It's very, very impressive from Reform UK. They've come from basically nothing. Okay, there's there's heritage there with UKIP and with the Brexit Party, but at the same time they're essentially a new political movement.
Right, and I mean, a lot of people now begin to wonder, and we had Paul Scully on just earlier saying, this is possibly the sign of a new way of voting in this country, and it's not any longer just going to be a two-party system, because effectively one side of the political divide has been split.
You're absolutely right, Mike, and the thing is that this election has never really been about who's the government going to be. We knew it was going to be Labour, and the question that is still emerging and is being answered every minute that continues this evening is, what does the opposition look like? The Liberal Democrats have done very well. The Green Party have doubled from 1 to 2, probably, if the exit poll is to be believed. Reform UK have come from nothing to probably 7, maybe more, and the Conservatives have been very badly wiped out. Not as badly as some thought, but if they get 130, 131, well, that's not as bad as they thought it would be.
It's not an end of the Conservative Party with that sort of number, is it?
You're right. I mean, it's worse than 1997 for them, but I mean, sub 100 was the nightmare scenario. I spoke to a very senior person in number 10 until recently, no longer. The person's now lost their job, of course, but he told me that he thought that 200 was the dream, 150 was a really good night for them, and anything under 100 would have been a disaster. So to be around the 130 mark, that's maybe not too terrible for the Conservatives, even though it is terrible. But the point is how terrible.
And for most of them, they could see it coming a mile off.
Yes.
I don't think anybody was under any illusions. And also what we knew from the last few days of campaigning was that the Tory party in general had said to an awful lot of people, stop campaigning in your own constituency. You've got no chance of winning it. Come and campaign in the places that we might have a chance of holding on to.
Yes, indeed. And some of that is just party management, it's management of volunteers and so on. It's usually the much smaller parties, the Lib Dems, for example, that would do that even up to sort of a week beforehand, would say, actually move constituencies, go somewhere nearby. But what the Conservatives have found, especially Amanda Milling in her constituency, has found that she really had an amazingly bad night, and Labour have taken that, and that is a really incredibly bad result for them. Cannock Chase is the one where Labour have done tremendously well. I mean, she had a majority of over 20,000, and we're going to see other seats like that throughout the evening.
And there was a sort of a fear at one point that Laura Trott in Sevenoaks was vulnerable, but I presume this number of 131 would safeguard her, would you think?
I'll just check now if you want.
I mean, it is a bit like that, isn't it?
It is a bit like that. So
you have a look, and let's have a.
If you give me 2 seconds,
you can hold on to that thought, because there's a count at Keir Starmer finally, so I think we're going to go over to that and have a look. He's looking pretty pleased with himself.
So it's saying that Sevenoaks for Laura Trott, who was the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, likely Conservative hold, 95% likelihood, so she is not in trouble. The one that's interesting, I think, is Pontefract Castleford.
Here we are. Hold that thought.
On the 4th of July 2024, do hereby give notice that the number of votes cast for each candidate in the election was as follows. Nick, the incredible flying brick.
Best name so far.
raving loony party, 162. Charlie Clinton, Liberal Democrats, 2,236. Andrew Joseph Feinstein, 7,312. Wise Islam Independent, 636. Senthil Kumar Independent, 40. Marine Malik, the Conservative Party candidate, 2,776. John Edmund Poynton, UK Independence Party, 75. David Roberts, Reform UK, 2,371. Tom Scripps, Socialist Equality Party, 61. Bobby Elmo Smith, 19. David Robert Stansel, Green Party, 4,030. Keir Starmer, Labour Party, 18,884.
So there it is, Keir Starmer is, which, I mean, we wouldn't have expected him not to be, but...
No great surprise.
Quite a few candidates in there, though.
Yeah, including Elmo, including the Monster Raving Loony Party, various others, but yeah, I mean, he'll get that now, that he'll be Prime Minister. There'll be lots of people standing against him. No real shock there, but a relief to him at 3 o'clock in the morning that he has now won that seat and can now prepare for government.
Yeah, and he doesn't look a man who is kind of ready for it. I mean, we were discussing this earlier. We can't really do it now because we're almost out of time, but we'll come back to it. You know, whether Keir Starmer is actually ready, will
no
remain
one's
to be
ever ready,
seen.
Mike. Well,
this is the thing. I mean, you've worked in Downing Street, and I'll talk to you about that coming up in a little bit in the next hour, because it must be an incredible thing to wake up knowing that the business that you are in has just given you the opportunity to do the top job in the country.
Tony Blair jumped up and down while playing tennis and just went, I'm the Prime Minister, I'm the Prime Minister. He couldn't believe it. It was just an incredible thing for him, and it is an incredible thing. It's a privilege. Very, very few people get it.
I know, and very few people do it very well. And I wonder whether we're going to have somebody else who doesn't do it very well either. But this is, of course, an all-nighter. We're here. We'll be back after this.
DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Up All Night. It wasn't called that at the start of it, but I think Up All Night sounds a bit better than All Nighter, but we'll call it that for now. It's 4 minutes past 3 in the morning. We've got quite a few breaking news stories to tell you. We've got Sir Keir Starmer, who's been re-elected the next Prime Minister, pretty much. We'll find out tomorrow morning exactly what his plan is. I'll get from Theo Ashwood in a second precisely how that day is going to unfold. Let's listen to a voice note. We've got one from Roger, who's in Australia.
Hello, Mike. It's Roger in Melbourne. Enjoying the programme, very exciting. Could you possibly get Nigel to come over here and form a party like Reform? We're under a Labour government here and they are literally destroying the country. I've been here 60 years and things have never been as bad as they are now.
Goodness me. Well, Roger, listen, you can't have him because I think he's needed elsewhere, i.e. here. I live in Yvette Cooper's constituency, says Oliver. I'm 18. It's the first election I'm voting in. John Thomas, the Reform candidate, absolutely deserves the seat. Yvette has sat and watched the area go into decline. I hope my vote for Reform makes the difference. And that, of course, echoes what we've been saying all night so far, that a lot of young, particularly young men, have decided to vote for Reform in their first ever election.
Yes, and what's interesting about Yvette Cooper's seat in Yorkshire is that actually Reform think they're going to do quite well in that seat. Yeah. Labour are disputing it. They're insisting that they can win and that Yvette Cooper is going to retain her seat. But it would be a huge scalp for Reform if they were to take out, you know, the woman who is supposed to be Home Secretary now within the coming days. And it's looking like that it's going to be a very tightly run contest. Just interestingly, Rupert Harrison, he was George Osborne's right-hand man in the Treasury, the architect of austerity. He's lost his seat in Bicester and Woodstock, I should say, to the Liberal Democrats. Right. They've also taken Henley, which is like
the Lib Dems have.
Lib Dems have taken Henley, which is like that's
that was Boris Johnson for a while, wasn't it?
Seat between
the Dems have got Henley.
Yeah, they've got Henley as well. So I mean, the Lib Dems are. We talk about there is this realignment on the right of British politics. And we talk about, of course, Reform and the pressure they're putting on, but at the same time you've got the squeeze from the Liberal Democrats that Rishi Sunak was desperate to try and avoid by when he came into Downing Street talking about integrity and accountability.
Yeah, that didn't go well, did it?
And lots of Tories, you know, rather high-minded Remain type Tories, perhaps you might say, turning around and saying, actually, no, we don't like you much, and we're not going to vote for you. We're going to vote for Lib Dems.
And what's happening here, Scarlett? Because Scarlett Maguire's still here, by the way, jail partners. Who's voting Lib Dem? Who wasn't then? Is this because is this former Tory voters or what?
It will be a mix. I think it'll be a lot of them will be former Conservative voters. Although actually, when you look at the breakdown of how many Conservative 2019 voters are going to Lib Dem, the headline figure isn't that big, but that's partly because their votes are just concentrated in places where they're going to win them. But it'll be a mixture of Lib Dems and anyone who wants to get the Conservatives out.
Right. Okay, so it could be
a lot of tactical votes.
We're seeing, and there are some signs there. We've seen in some constituencies where Labour vote share has been really quite dramatically down on the last election, where you wouldn't expect it to be to help the Lib Dems on their way.
You know, before 2019, the Lib Dems thought they were in with a chance of getting into government ridiculously now, as it now seems. But you know, they sort of benefit occasionally from these sort of surges of voting, and then it all disappears again. They get so excited, they all think, "Oh, this is great! You know, we've got a real force behind us," and then it just goes away.
If they're winning in Bicester and Woodcock, they're going to have a really great night.
It's a good night, and it's looking like a decidedly bad night for the SNP.
I was asking you about Aberdeen South actually.
I think Aberdeen South could well be in play actually. If you got there was a result in Kilmarnock and Loudon. I'm sorry if I didn't say that right, but it was Labour managed to get their vote
hang on.
share.
We've got Grant Shapps' declaration. Sorry to put my hand up like that. Here we go.
For each
Good
candidate
hat of the night.
Said election is as follows: Aaron Jack Oliver, Reform UK, 6,397. Butcher Sarah, the Green Party, 2,986. Lewin Andrew Allen, Labour Party, 19,877.
question.
Munro, John Peter, Liberal Democrats, 3,117. Shapps Grant, the Conservative Party candidate, 16,078.
He's lost it, hasn't he?
The number of ballot papers rejected was as follows. Want of an official mark, 0. Voting for more than one candidate, 46. Writing or mark by which voter could be identified, 0. Unmarked or void for uncertainty, 146. The total being 192.
So, Grant
the electorate was 75,000.
Third cabinet minister down by my count after Alex Chalkin.
He's probably the biggest name so far because he's also served in practically every job of the cabinet. I interviewed him. The only one time I interviewed him was when he was Home Secretary for about 2.5 weeks, I think.
And he was also somebody who was hoping to potentially run in the leadership campaign.
Well, this is
a
when we
more
start
moderate caretaker kind of role.
But this is where we end up having these conversations about who's going to be left to actually, you know, pick up the slack and pick up the wreckage.
And just to Scarlett's earlier point, actually, that 130 number that the exit poll suggested for the Conservatives looks to be at the top end of the spread. Actually, the midpoint is looking like it might be a bit lower, that they might come out with
120 or something like that,
or even as low as 105, 110. So actually,
well, that'd be interesting because we were all asked earlier on tonight to make a little guess about what the number of seats would be, and I guessed 101. For the Tories,
but also, I think that it could be quite close on that. And just to point out on the Starmer result that you were talking about that and heard from Keir Starmer, change begins. That was his message, but that ignored the fact that he'd seen his vote halved from 36,000 down to 18,000.
I've just got a note on that from Derek. Starmer's got half the votes he had in 2019, down 18,000, and he still won.
And actually there was an independent candidate. There was a pro-Palestine candidate, Andrew Feinstein, who was challenging in this one.
Oh, so that's quite significant, isn't it?
And took a chunk out of his vote. I think Palestine and Israel is going. They've managed to, Scarlett's again another point made by you earlier, you know, they've managed to suppress it during this election campaign, but this is going to run and run. It's going to become increasingly important, and it's pressure from the left. Okay, there's going to be, Keir Starmer's always had pressure from, you know, how patriotic is he, what does he stand up for this country, from Conservatives and Reform candidates, but there's also now going to be pressure from the left as well, particularly from the Liberal Democrats, on Israel, on Palestine, and we're starting to see chunks taken out of the vote, but significant chunks taken out of the vote.
And I mean, a question for you on this, Scarlett, in terms of public opinion about what happens in Palestine. You know, it was massively front and centre in October, November, December, and probably even running into January. But are the public less concerned about it now? I mean, there seems to be less activity going on the streets. You know, there's not as many Palestine marches, pro-Palestine marches as there used to be. Or if there are, they're a lot smaller. I was just told Ian Duncan-Smith held his seat, which is quite a big move, isn't it?
That is extraordinary.
Quite a big move.
I actually also feel really bad because I literally said in the office yesterday there is no chance of Ian Duncan-Smith holding his seat, so I'm very sorry for everyone there.
It's Chingford, and that's Greenbelt land. And I wonder whether the housing reforms being put forward by Keir Starmer to build on the Greenbelt, thousands of new homes, whether that helped Ian Duncan-Smith, who's of course a former Conservative leader.
One thing that's maybe it shouldn't surprise me, but it has, when we do focus groups everywhere, is just the strength of opposition to housing, to that housing policy, if it's being built anywhere near them. It's so strong.
I mean, the thing, and I say this as well, and you and I have had this conversation, everywhere I go in the south of England, they're building houses. You know, the idea that we're not building houses is for the birds, because it's always going on. And what's happening in lots of places, parts of Sussex, which I know very well, are the pressure on schools, the pressure on, you know, just the infrastructure and the doctors' offices and people not being able to get dentists. There's just more houses than they need.
And there's also no infrastructure.
No.
So you could build houses in the middle of nowhere, and nobody, you know, is that somebody where, you know, you want to live?
And if you haven't got a car, there's no public transport. You know, there's all of that.
And what's also happening is that Starmer is basically we're going to have these £20 billion of austerity cuts unless he can find the money from somewhere, and the money doesn't exist at the moment. And it's coming to unprotected departments like the Department of Transport. You want to get economic growth. Yes, build the houses, but you know that single track road that you get stuck behind a tractor? Make it a dual carriageway.
Yes.
That's how you get economic growth. So people take that journey and say, actually, you know
but
what?
Have you seen how long it takes to do anything in this country? Building a dual carriageway sounds easy.
What, Crested Newts, something like that, Mike?
Yeah, listen, I mean, I had in Wiltshire, the entire village I lived in got flooded 3 times in a week, and the council said we couldn't clear out the culvert that went under the church because they had voles, water voles. And, you know, they were protected.
But what do you think about Ian Duncan Smith holding his seat, though? It just shows what, again, I don't want to just sound it, because the more I say it, the more naff it sounds, but it is an extraordinary election. You're looking at the Labour leader and the Labour deputy leader having significant chunks taken out of their vote at the same time that their party is going to win an almost sort of unprecedented landslide. You have people like Ian Duncan Smith who were only holding on by, like, a hair's... Yeah, exactly. In 2019, some, you know, holding their seat. Obviously, that's because Faiza Shaheen managed to get sort of nearly 13,000 votes. But it isn't
It's kind of all over the place, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's all over the place.
Yeah,
I mean,
the Faiza Shaheen one's interesting because when there was the Diane Abbott row and Keir Starmer had to back down on Diane Abbott, he pressed ahead with Faiza Shaheen and Lloyd Russell Moyle down in Brighton as a way of trying to show his strength, kicking out those from the left of the party.
And Lloyd Russell Moyle was kind of effectively deselected, wasn't he?
Yes, but he shouted, he had this rally at a Labour conference, outside of the Labour conference, and kept on calling him Keith. And everybody loved it on the left of the party, but Keir Starmer clearly had enough, and he's not prepared to accept this kind of dissent within his party going into Parliament, and that's why he's cleared them out. Now, he can't get rid of Diane Abbott, he can't get rid of John McDonnell, but the left of the party is defenestrated to an extent.
Yeah, and it's, you know, so the combined vote share of Faiza Shaheen and the Labour candidate was 25,000, far more than Ian Duncan Smith got. So a bit like you tallying up the Reform and Conservative vote share. So it is exactly what's happened.
And is it looking like there is more of a turnout everywhere, or is it just in certain places?
It actually looks like turnout might be quite down, but we'll see. Overall, the picture looks like turnout's down and maybe closer to like 2005 levels, where it was incredibly low, sort of 60%. Let's see how it goes in the overnight.
And in terms of Starmer's kind of public appearances, I mean, you were saying Rishi Sunak will probably at some point in the morning come outside of Downing Street and resign. When will Keir Starmer sort of declare that he's now the new Prime Minister?
So the order of play will be, and I'd imagine it would probably happen sort of breakfast time, 9 o'clock. Rishi Sunak will come, he'll firstly get the result in Richmond in his constituency in Yorkshire. He'll then drive, maybe helicopter down to London, and there he'll come back to Downing Street around 7, I probably imagine about 8 o'clock. He'll give a speech on the steps of Downing Street, say that he's going to tender his resignation as Prime Minister. Let's wait and see what happens in terms of the leadership of the Conservative Party, whether he stands down from that point as well, from that job as well. He'll then go to Buckingham Palace to meet the King, and he will tender his resignation to the King. He will then go, the car then leaves for his, I'd imagine, back to his constituency home with his family. Keir Starmer will then drive to Buckingham Palace to meet the King, and he will offer to form a government. The King will agree, and then he'll drive to Downing Street, and the whole process takes about 45 minutes. Come into Downing Street, and he'll say that he's announced his government, and then through the day we'll then start to get cabinet appointments to his cabinet. But again, I think that also depends on who makes it.
And in terms of, this is probably a really dim question to ask you, but in terms of just removing stuff out of the house, you know, we always see the removal lorries sort of turning up. Is that all done like just in one day?
Yes, it can be done very quickly, and I think also that the family weren't spending, Rishi Sunak's family weren't spending a huge amount of time in the flat. That Mrs Sunak didn't particularly like Downing Street. So
they were in number 11 as well.
They were in number 11 because that's the bigger flat. So I don't think it can be done quite quickly, and it can be done quite swiftly, and then.
But it's kind of an unenviable end, isn't it? I mean, I remember talking to I think it was one of these presidential candidates in America. Can't remember exactly which one it was, but he basically said the day that they lost the election, all the Secret Service people just disappeared. And, you know, you've had these sort of people wandering around the house for weeks and weeks and months, and then and suddenly you wake up in the morning, there's nobody there.
I've got a shocker of a result, if you're interested in it, which is Conservatives have gained a seat in Leicester. And again, it's the left, it's Claudia Webb splitting the left-wing vote. But that is astonishing.
That is ridiculous, isn't it? They're not supposed to be doing that. So the final question for you before we break is, what's the attitude now when you poll people about Palestine and Israel?
Yeah.
What do you get?
To go back to that, it's interesting. Sympathies towards Palestine definitely increased, actually. So you saw a rallying, so basically the public before October 7th was split pretty much entirely equally between Israel, Palestine and don't care / don't know in about equal measure. You saw then support for Israel increase a bit, and then as the sort of Israel's sort of stance on it went on, you saw support for Palestine increase. But it has never been that salient an issue to most of the public.
Right.
It's just that the parts of the public that care about it really care an awful lot.
Right, OK. Good news. Well, thank you very much indeed. Scarlett McQuire and Theo Rushwood, keep staying around because we're going to need you some more. We've got Alex Phillips coming up next. We'll find out what she's got to say. Nick Dubois as well. And also Clacton. The result, apparently, I'm told, is imminent. That, of course, is Nigel Farage's seat. So, or it may well become Nigel Farage's seat. Grant Shapps is out. He's just gone for a Burton. The Tories are having a terrible night. The Labour Party are going to be the next government, as if you didn't know. But the Reform Party is also the big story. We'll have more for you coming up after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to Up All Night with me, Mike Graham. We are here, of course, all the way through until, I don't know when. I mean, it seems to go on till about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Basically, I'm now joined by Nick Dubois and Alex Phillips. Very good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Very nice to see you back.
Yes, I know, after my enforced exile in southern France.
Enforced exile in southern France. Very nice too. Well, what a night for reform. We're expecting the Clacton result to come in the next 10 minutes, we think. I would imagine you'd be very surprised if Nigel Farage is not then the MP for Clacton.
Yeah, I would be astonished if Nigel doesn't get his seat, but I was also pretty astonished at the projection of 13 seats, because having seen this occur with UKIP, with the Brexit Party, looking at projections there as well, that very often when it comes to a Farage-led party, it's always the bridesmaid, never the bride. It's very hard to break through if you're not a legacy party under first past the post. And because the vote share is so evenly distributed around the country, I think what we're going to see is reform. We already are seeing, actually, reform scoring lots of very solid, convincing second places. Wales is one to watch for that as well. I think reform will come second overall. And then seats-wise, 3, 4 for 7 max?
Yeah, 7 max I think was probably what I was going to call it as well, but a terrible night for the Tories. I mean, we've just seen Grant Shapps being hoisted out of his own seat, and it's not going to stop there, is it? I mean, we think Gillian Keegan's probably going to be out of a seat, Alex Chalk probably as well.
He's gone, I think.
Yeah, I think he's gone.
Yeah, I think he's gone.
Yeah.
Justice Secretary of State. Yeah, I think quite a lot of the cabinet are at risk, but you know, I love the phrases that come out, isn't it? It was a disappointing night. It's an absolute horror.
That's what the Democrats said about Joe Biden. Disappointing night. You couldn't finish a sentence, you know.
So it's a horror story. I think honestly, I thought it would be worse.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm kind
You're not the first person that said that, actually, because Tim Montgomery said the same. He thought it could be an extinction event, and this isn't.
No, I think the extinction event could still happen when this party has to decide what it stands for, what it believes in, or if they just go into another bout of infighting before they even have that conversation. So it's still an existential threat.
You think they might learn that by infighting, this is how they got here, right?
I mean, Rishi Sunak himself wrote about it when he was a student, that parties don't win elections when they're infighting, and obviously that lesson hasn't been learnt. So it's an absolute shambles. Reform have made an impression, period, now. And I think what's really interesting is what Alex has said. They're clearly going to end up with anywhere between 5-7 seats. Their strong second places actually give them the potential now to become an organised, serious political party. But they need to do one thing. They need to get a chief executive into that party, not just run as the whim of whether it's Richard Tice or Nigel Farage. Let them do the politics. They need a chief executive in there to get them organised, to get funding, to democratise that party. Then they could be a serious force when Labour implode, which I fear they will.
Well, this is it. If Reform get a good handful of seats in Westminster, they have access to short money. They get broadcasting. They get broadcasting entitlement. They have to employ professional staff. At the moment, it has been run. I mean, Nigel himself said, and I think Nigel genuinely did wait until the last minute to come back as leader, looked at what was there and said, well, this party is almost a mirage. There are no branches. There are very few people who can go out in leaflets and knock on doors,
and it's often criticised for being run as a company rather than as a political party. Is that an issue or not really?
Well, I think they're going to have to change that. I think, I think they'll look at, I think the powers that be sort of, legally in the country will look at the constitution of the party and say this doesn't really fly. But the reason, I mean, without going into boring detail, the reason why that happened in the formulation of the Brexit party is because Nigel had a hell of a problem with the National Executive Committee in his UKIP days and thought, I cannot be held hostage by a load of people who are faction fighting.
But it would be a mistake not to democratise it, because at some point you can't have the bloke who owns the party as self-appointed leader. That is kind of not going to work. So he's going to have to get used to that, I think, because that party will grow. If they can do that old Liberal Democrat leaflet of Reform coming second here, but it's true, that's a heck of a platform.
Also, a point was made by Theo, I think, earlier on, that in places where they've come second to Labour, quite close second to Labour, 30% of the vote, they're a threat to Labour as well.
Sunderland.
Because Labour are going to say, well, maybe if we because we can lose Labour votes to Reform.
I think what's interesting, when you look at the old UKIP vote share from 2015, as a nerd that I am, I remember it in detail. A third of their votes came from undecideds, or people who hadn't even voted before, a third from Tories and a third from Labour. And I think Reform have the potential to do the same, but I think voters in many respects act a bit lemmingy, where the media says, well, it's just all Tory voters going. I think when other voters, especially in the Red Wall, especially in working class areas, suddenly see that Reform are a force that are going to be around, that vote from Labour will start to move across, especially when Labour's the incumbent party as well.
Got a bit of breaking news for you. Jeremy Corbyn
has won.
Yep.
Yeah, I thought he might.
Jeremy Corbyn has won.
I thought he might.
I thought I'd try a different way of announcing that so that you could tell me whether you thought he'd won or not. I quite like that. That's quite good, though, isn't it?
Is what your technique, or that Jeremy Corbyn has won?
No, my technique. I mean, I don't have a massive problem with Jeremy Corbyn. I'm glad he wasn't Prime Minister. I'm glad he's no longer leader of the Labour Party. But a bit of a blow to Keir Starmer, surely.
Well, what's astonishing, actually, if you really drill down into what Labour's done in this election so far, and it is so far, we've still got many results to come in, their vote share doesn't seem to have moved much from the last time Corbyn contested the election.
No, it's actually gone down.
And they're dining out. Actually, Sir Keir Starmer's majority in his own seat has gone down. And yet Labour dining out on, well, we've reformed the party since Jeremy Corbyn and attracted loads of new voters. No, you haven't. You're winning by default.
We're going to Clacton in a second. Let's just go there now and see whether we're ready.
The result of the Clacton constituency Member of Parliament. I, Ian Davidson, being the acting returning officer at the election for a Member of Parliament for the Clacton constituency on Thursday the 4th of July, do hereby give notice that the number of votes recorded for each candidate at the said election is as follows. Bensilem Matthew, Liberal Democrats, 2016. Farage Nigel Paul, Reform UK, 21,235. Jameson Craig, Climate Party, 48. Mac Tony, Independent, 317. Osborne Natasha, Green Party, 1,935. Owusa Nepal Jovan, Labour Party, 7,448. Pat Anastu Tassos, Heritage Party, 33. Pemberton Andrew, UKIP No to Illegal Immigration, 116. Watling Giles Francis, the Conservative Party candidate, 12,820. The number of ballot papers rejected was 111. I therefore do hereby declare that Nigel Paul Farage is duly elected as the Member of Parliament.
Probably the biggest majority in the country, sorry.
She's having a moment. Alex Phillips is in tears.
Oh,
it's brilliant.
Oh,
it's brilliant, isn't it? I mean, I'm happy to say that now.
Eight times he's tried and he's made it.
And all of those people, right? All of those people who said he'll never win a seat. He's tried 7 times. He got beaten by a dolphin last time. Yeah, well, let's hear what he's got to say.
It's been a well-run, well-fought and remarkably clean election battle. I think we'd all agree on that, and thank you for your services. I promise that I will do my absolute best as a Member of Parliament. I had 20 years as an MEP, but it's not quite the same link or same responsibility with constituents. I will do my absolute best to put Clacton on the map. I'll do my best to bring more tourists. I'll do my best to try and bring some private investment. It's over 30 years ago that I fought my first parliamentary by-election, and I fought lots of them over the years, and I've had big successes in European elections and perhaps less so under first past the post, which is a very demanding, very, very demanding problem for smaller parties. I will say this, it's 4 weeks and 3 days since I decided to come out of retirement and throw my hat in the ring. I think what Reform UK has achieved in those just few short weeks is truly extraordinary. Given that we had no money, no branch structure, virtually nothing across the country, we are going to come second in hundreds of constituencies. How many seats we're going to win, I don't know. But to have done this in such a short space of time says something very fundamental is happening. It's not just disappointment with the Conservative Party. There is a massive gap on the centre-right of British politics, and my job is to fill it. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. But it's not just what we do in Parliament as a national party that matters, it's what we do out round the country. Getting 5,000 people in that room in Birmingham last week, the energy, the optimism, the enthusiasm, the belief that Westminster is just completely out of touch with ordinary people says to me that my plan is to build a mass national movement over the course of the next few years and hopefully be big enough to challenge the general election properly in 2029. What is interesting is there's no enthusiasm for Labour, there's no enthusiasm for Starmer whatsoever. In fact, about half of the vote is simply an anti-Conservative vote. This Labour government will be in trouble very, very quickly. And we will now be targeting Labour votes. We're coming for Labour, be in no doubt about that. I want to thank the team that have helped me do this over the last few weeks, my fellow candidates for behaving as impeccably as they have. Believe me, folks, this is just the first step of something that is going to stun all of you. Thank you very much.
Wow. And thereby the second Reform candidate becomes an MP. So that's 2 more than everybody said they would get about 4 weeks ago. Yeah. So it's been quite extraordinary. We're going to quickly go to the news. I'll get your reactions afterwards. Alex Phillips is here. Nick Dubois is here. We're going to be handing out the Kleenex shortly. Everybody's fine, though. Nigel Farage is an MP after all this time. Let's get some news.
Tonight is Political Party Night on Talk.
Stay up all night with the UK's top team on the Ultimate Talk Election Party All-Nighter.
Sample a night of deep political vision and crucial constituency comment. Kicking off with Julia Hartley-Brewer, first past the polling stations from 10 p.m.
Followed by speculation, swings and surprises as the votes come in with me, Grand Mixer Mike Graham, in the nation's definitive anatomy of an election from 1am.
Then Ian Collins hits the decks, back where he belongs, out on the terrace for a post-vote 4am poll party.
The Talk Ultimate Election Political Party All-Nighter.
Tonight from 10 p.m, racing through till dawn. Election night is go on Talk.
Do you know, I'm quite looking forward to it. I haven't had an election in over 5 years.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yeah.
They need to go and he needs to get back.
Here we are, back in business, and I'm afraid it's a bad night for the Tories, probably the worst night they've had in many a year. Nick Dubois is here. You were, of course, an MP, you were a member of the government, you were Brexit secretary.
I was his chief of staff for 123 days,
yes,
until we quit
days.
in disgust.
And you look back on those sort of golden years.
Yes, they were very quiet.
As quiet times, the Tory party seemed to be in charge of things, you know.
Well, in the Cameron years, they were very quiet. But actually, that's where the seeds of the meltdown of the Conservative Party were laid. Now, I'm a Brexiteer, right? But that was no doubt, that was the moment when a lot of Conservatives thought, let's nail Europe, let's put it to a referendum. That's going to settle that issue one way or the other,
and for all.
And we move on. How wrong was that? And ever since then, it's forced people to choose. The Conservative Party has, for decades, been divided over Europe. That, fundamentally, is what has caused this seismic shift. And then, of course, the failure to deliver on Brexit, most obviously in immigration.
Partly because a lot of Tories tried to stop it from happening, which was the biggest problem of all, really.
Including the new Prime Minister.
I mean, when Alex Phillips and I first met, you know, it was sitting down on College Green, watching, you know, MP after MP coming out of the Houses of Parliament, trying to stop what had been legitimately voted on by a majority of people, you know, and it was absolutely horrendous. Oliver Dowden apparently has kept his seat. There's some good news for you.
Yes, and he was up against a 21-year-old. Now, nothing against young people going into politics, but goodness, that would be quite young when he got in. I wonder how close that was. We'll have to find out.
Let's talk a bit about the importance of this, though, Alex, because, you know, just before you were saying, you know, they need to make reform a bit more make reform a bit more sort of professional and make it
reform needs to reform.
I mean, it does. But I mean, this is a huge deal.
Right, this is massive.
I don't think you can overestimate how big this is.
This is massive. And do you know what? You were talking about the divisions in the Conservative Party. I think the problem with divisions on the right in general is the fact that the right wing of politics can't decide whether it's socially conservative or economically conservative, so to speak. And the general public tend to sit, by and large, I'd say, on the more socially conservative end of the spectrum, but economically somewhere in the middle. And the big arguments in the Conservative Party constantly seem to be around the sort of heart of the matter rather than the economics of the matter, whether it be, you know, trans rights and that sort of thing now, and hugging hoodies, or Brexit kind of fell into that, I think. There were economic arguments, but the psyche of what drove the voters were concepts of sovereignty and immigration. And what's happened is the Conservative Party have stuffed it up, fighting over these things. And yes, they've hemorrhaged a load of votes to reform, but no one's talking about the fact they're hemorrhaging votes to the Lib Dems as well. So this tug of war between the sort of ERG lot and the One Nation,
an awful lot, and not, by the way, like through apathy, through anger.
And I think
this is not my Conservative.
The left wing doesn't seem to have these problems as much when it comes to what does left-wingery mean. And I think that, you know, it's about time.
Although there's a lot of Labour Party members who still think Keir Starmer's not left-wing enough. You know, and they've got that. They haven't really got rid of all of them yet.
I mean, the old Labour lot have been smoked out. The sort of Brexiteer Labour-y types have gone, haven't they?
There's about 30 left-wing MPs there who you would class as left-wing MPs, which, when he's got 400, is not going to create too much damage.
It's going to be like Tony Blair's government. He could have as many nutters as he wanted because he could control them all. It didn't really matter. They could say what they wanted. It didn't affect any policy. But, oh, hang on. More breaking news. Jonathan Athey Jonathan Ashworth has lost his seat.
Sorry?
What?
Yeah. Where is that?
Labour's Jonathan Ashworth.
Labour's Jonathan Ashworth has lost his seat. That's what I'm being told. Leicester South, that's where they're going.
Is it Leicester
Independent?
Leicester
no,
East?
because the Tories have won a seat in Leicester. Something weird is going on in Leicester.
Yes, that looks like that's been a very divisive sort of sectarian thing that's gone on there. So
that sounds about right.
If Jonathan Ashworth has lost, that is a bombshell. I really think that needs to be checked.
I think tonight is absolutely more bombshell-like than any election I've done for a very long time.
And we are perfectly timed because the cabinet places will be coming up soon.
Yeah,
How many ex-cabinet members are we going to see going?
Absolutely
One thing we've not spoken a lot about in this election campaign is what you're alluding to there, this sort of sectarian voting with entities such as the Muslim vote, all of these independent candidates running against certain Labour candidates saying,
well, that's what happened to Keir Starmer. He lost half of his majority thanks to a pro-Palestine candidate. We're going to talk to David Bull in a second. Let's try and play that voice note that we had there from Mark, which has been sitting there for a bit. I'd just like to hear some more of those.
Hi, Mike. Great show. Enjoying what's going on through the night. Isn't it funny that before the election we had the Conservative Great and Good and some political commentators talking about the risk of reform splitting the Conservative vote and allowing Labour in? Well, looking at the results so far, maybe Reform should have been talking far more about don't vote for the Conservatives because a Conservative vote means letting Labour in. Just a thought.
Yeah, very good thought. Thank you very much indeed for having it. Now, Labour's Jonathan Ashworth has lost Leicester South, which he has held since 2011. He received 13,760 votes, but lost out to independent candidate Shaukat Adam, who gained 14,739. So I think that is, as you said, some kind of single unit policy type situation, right?
Yeah, and of course he played a huge profile in this election. You virtually on every screen, every time you wanted to hear him, he was here, he was on talk, doing his bit. That will be a blow to Keir Starmer.
Yeah.
And
Rupert Lowe's won, in Great Yarmouth.
Has he? I thought that, so far my predictions are coming through. Like
that's
Mystic
number 3.
Meg.
Sorry to interrupt you, Nick. Carry on.
No, I think what it is, that's going to take a big shine, well, not a huge shine off, but it's going to take some of the shine off Labour's win there. And I think it's going to be very interesting when people start to...
Because he was a pretty key member of Starmer's team, wasn't he?
Yeah, very much so. He was out there on the front foot, promoting policies.
He was always doing media rounds as well. Let's talk to Dr. David Bull. Just perfect timing. Our talk's very own Dr. David Bull, and of course co-leader of Reform, who I think is returning this weekend. Dr. David, a very good morning to you. Congratulations are in order, I think.
Very, very good morning to you, lovely people. How are we?
Yeah, very well indeed. Well, just as we were about to say that Rupert Lowe has now become the 3rd Reform MP, where is it going to end? I mean, what are you thinking?
I mean, look, if this poll is right, it's an amazing night for us. Look, we said, what does success look like? I think I spoke to Nick about it the other day, saying that actually if we got 2 or 3 seats, that would be amazing. Look, we're only 4 years old. Richard Tice sat in my kitchen and said, how are we going to build Reform into a significant and substantial party? And we have done that. Yeah. And so if we are right and we get 13 seats, then that is extraordinary. Now, the one thing that I would say is look at our vote share, because it seems to be double that of the Liberal Democrats. And yet, under this ridiculous system, we will end up with only a quarter of the number of seats. And I think that shows there is a democratic deficit which desperately needs to be addressed.
Well, of course, there was a time when Keir Starmer thought proportional representation was the way to go. And people were worried that if he got into government, that he would actually introduce it. I wonder if he's going to be quite so enthusiastic about it now.
Well, of course he's not. No. This is the problem, isn't it? The incumbent parties don't want it, but you do want it if you're a smaller party. Alex also is there. Hello, good morning, Alex.
Hello, gorgeous.
That's very sweet.
She was in tears earlier.
I was.
It was sweet. It was quite sweet to see.
Because our Nigel's finally won a seat. It's amazing. And actually, it's brilliant to see Reform doing so well.
And that's right, Alex. And you and I have been there before when we won and went into the European Parliament and we changed history. And I keep saying this line, we've done it before, we're going to do it again. And Alex, the thing I would say to you is around the country, the feeling is the same. I literally banged all these doors and every single person pretty much said they were going to vote Reform. I haven't seen that. I haven't actually ever seen it to this degree.
Right. And the numbers are huge, aren't they? I mean, I saw a figure earlier that Nigel Farage was suggesting it might be as many as 6 million people that will have ended up voting for reform, which is more than, a sort of a 50% increase on the 4 million that UKIP got.
So I've just seen some statistics that say, actually, in terms of our share, we're not far behind the Conservative Party. So that, again, doesn't translate into the seats. And I think people tomorrow, or no, later today, when they wake up and they're having breakfast, will be thinking, hang on a minute, this feels very, very unfair. I was asked, I think it was on BBC One tonight, about the Lib Dems and the fact that they target seats, and it's really, really clever. Now, you could also say that's really cynical, because what we've been doing is giving an offering to everyone around the country, and we are taking not only Conservative voters, we're taking those red wall seats as well from Labour, and that's how I ended up as an MEP in the northwest of England, and we're seeing that across the north as well. People who are Brexiteers, this is what we talk about on Talk the whole time, with my other hat on, is the fact that Brexit was never achieved, that we annexed Northern Ireland, we stuck a border in the RSC, the whole thing's been absolutely...
Campaigning. You're still campaigning. Come on, it's the election's nearly over. David, listen, what's really impressive, and I don't think it's going to change, is Reform are coming second strongly in quite a number of seats. Now, that, if you win 6 million votes, maybe more, actually, you have the basis there of becoming a real challenger, which has always been your goal for the next election. Correct. But you are going to have to get organised, aren't you? You're going to have some form where you can clear out the last remaining dodgy candidates, you get money coming in, and you're going to have to democratise the party to do that, aren't you?
We absolutely are, as you know, Nick, because with this number of wins, when we get this number of members of parliament, you get short money as well. That gives you cash to enable you to build a party structure. We don't even have branches. We don't have local representatives. I mean, my brother's been with me this evening, and he's been laughing at the fact that it is literally held together by a few people. And so that we are an insurgent party. But yes, of course, now we have members of parliament, we can grow and develop and build. And actually, we did screen our candidates early on, and we had a thorough vetting process. Then we employed a company, they didn't deliver. And then at the last sort of stages, we then brought candidates in who were not vetted. And when we found those candidates to be bad apples, they're out. So you're right, yes, of course. And now, and Nigel's really, really clear about this. This is not just about now. This is a 5-year plan.
It really is quite an extraordinary night. Jonathan Ashworth had just lost his seat as well for Labour. Keir Starmer's majority has been cut in half in his own constituency. Jeremy Corbyn is back in as an independent. George Galloway's out as an independent. I mean, it's a fascinating election for all sorts of reasons, David.
Yeah, absolutely right. I saw Grant Shapps as well. He's out.
Yeah.
And Galloway, I hear, is going to contest it and say that it was all, you know, obviously rigged. But, yeah, there's a lot of messages coming through here. And for me, just going around the country, I was in Scotland, I was in Peterhead and Aberdeen, I've been in Clacton, I've been with Richard in Boston. There is a very different feeling in the rural areas to the metropolitan areas. And that's when you see, actually, Britain is two countries.
Yeah. David, if I could ask you one thing. Have you got an eye on Wales? Because my assumption would be, and I could be wrong, with Labour vote share actually going down in Wales after all the mess over Vaughan Gethin, the Tories being essentially annihilated, Plaid Cymru are just going to get their odds and sods as they normally do. I would imagine that Reform could be the second party in Wales by vote share.
I have no idea, to be quite honest. What I do know,
Eyes on Wales, David.
Well, I'll talk about Scotland, if I may, just to show you the difference in the nations, is that we've built that from nothing. I did an event the other night with 150 people in it, and we believe that we are going to get people elected into the Scottish Parliament come their elections, which are not far off. I think Wales is another one that's really interesting. Working class people who work really, really hard, who are really dissatisfied with the two main parties, are coming over, and we're seeing that across the country.
What about young people? It strikes me, where I'd love to see the evidence, because I believe it, but I haven't any evidence, is you've really got into younger people voting for you. I was absolutely staggered how many young people people said to me, "No, I'm voting Reform."
Yeah.
And I was like,
"No, listen. I mean, we're going to have to dash because we've got so much going on. But listen, David, thank you so much. I mean, I was telling a story earlier of a friend of mine who's here, works in this building, who's got 2 sons. They're 17, 18.
Yeah.
They did mock votes at their school. Both schools voted for Reform.
Right, if you look at this, actually across Europe, Geert Wilders in the Netherlands has a huge
I've
amount
got some breaking news here.
Oh, really?
Will Tanner, right, high Conservative favourite on the lead, has lost Bury St Edmunds, which had a 24,000 majority.
Oh, well.
Blimey.
Need that check,
That's
but that's
careless.
coming on the WhatsApp group.
That's careless.
That's very careless.
But going back to the idea of the young people,
Sorry.
look, at the end of the day, ideologies get old-fashioned and get old. Kids think their parents are deeply untrendy. And I think when you look at what's happened to the Conservative Party, it's very clear centrist dad is dead.
Yeah.
Nobody wants centrist dad anymore.
No.
And you look at supportive parties like, you know, politicians such as Georgia Maloney. Geert Wilders in the Netherlands has the most support among high school kids. These young kids on TikTok actually like the politics of
Nigel
the alt-right.
had some quite amazing videos.
Some of the stuff on TikTok was brilliant.
It's pretty impressive.
It was. But listen, I mean, I'm sorry to throw you out, but I'm going to throw you out because we've got to move. And I'm nearly done. I don't know where the time has gone. I've done 3 hours nearly already. But Nick Dubois, Alex Phillips, great to talk to you. Thank you so much. I'm sure you'll be back in possibly with Ian Collins. I don't know. But I've got more coming up from Scarlett Maguire and Theo Rushwood next, right here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, welcome back. I don't know about you, but it's pretty hard to keep up with all the things that are going on. Suella Braverman has just won her seat. We've already heard about Grant Shapps losing his. Gillian Keegan's apparently now lost hers. Nigel Farage is the new Clacton MP. Also, of course, we've just heard from David Ball. Rupert Lowe has won Great Yarmouth, so that's 3 Reform MPs now in the new Parliament. Scarlett has returned along with Theo. You say that we've got a sort of slightly revised outlook now on things?
So we were talking about some of the health checks to the exit poll at the top of the programme, and it does actually look like the BBC have quite substantially revised that poll. So they've now got Labour on 405, down 5. Conservatives on 154, up 23, which I think is quite surprising. Lib Dems on 56, that's 5 less than they were. SNP down 4 on 6. Plaid on 4, and Reform now on 4 is what the BBC is saying.
OK, so down from 13 to 4.
Yeah.
And the 4C would be Boston and Skegness.
I presume so. I think they seem pretty confident about that.
Which Richard Ty's seat, I think it's also interesting, particularly just focusing on Leicester, that Jonathan Ashworth result. He was Shadow Paymaster General. He was tipped to have a big job in Keir Starmer's government. Leicester politics now it just is microcosm because you had that Tory win gaining Leicester East.
Right.
It is extraordinary. So you had in Leicester East, you had Claudia Webb and Keith Vaz both coming in, former Labour MPs coming in and winning between them about 9,000 votes.
Right.
That handed
this was meant to be Keith Vaz's comeback, wasn't it?
That handed the votes to the Tories. And then in Leicester South with Jonathan Ashworth, you had he lost out because there was a pro-Palestine independent candidate who stood.
So this could still happen in a couple of other places. Sorry, go on.
No, Thangham Debonair's lost her seat in Bristol
to the
Central.
Greens.
Yeah, so a lot of people were expecting this, but it's still another big blow to Labour and their shadow cabinet.
It's shadow cabinet, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it shows the volatility because there's going to be a real temptation. If you tune into places like the BBC, they're going to be saying it's a return to stability after years of Conservative chaos. Labour are going to win a majority of 170, whatever it is. But actually, this is laying the groundwork for much more volatility in our political in politics right now. Look to we can all feel very happy about ourselves that Keir Starmer's coming in, and look at what's happening in France.
I'm not happy about it. I don't know.
It's rhetorical. Sorry, right?
Okay. You've forgotten where you were for a second there. Heaven's sake.
I'm trying to create a sort of No, I'm not. I'm very happy to be able to talk. I
don't mean that. That's fine. Don't worry.
If you look, if you tune into the BBC, I'm sure there are going to be lots of very happy people that they're looking to France. They're saying, look at Marine Le Pen, look at what's happened in Italy with Giorgia Meloni, and actually we've got Keir Starmer, a Labour left of centre Prime Minister with a majority of 165. But look closely at the results, and you will see that this is laying the groundwork for much more volatility in 5 years' time. Farage winning big, and the vote share that he's secured. There's not going to be a change to proportional representation anytime soon because Starmer's not going to have it. But he's putting in the groundwork now for 5 years' time, and I think it's quite possible to see some sort of...
And he's been doing this for a while, so, I mean, he knows how to do it. I mean, Alex was just saying that as well. And also what David Bull just said I thought was interesting, that, this is now two different countries. We have the inner cities, we have the traditional, I suppose, what you might call, Labour heartlands, but the rural parts of this country are now perhaps not just Conservative anymore. They're a mix of all sorts of things, as are now the sort of the overall kind of change between town and country is it's not the same.
And we have different worldviews, completely different outlooks on life from the left of politics, looking towards our place in the world, looking towards particularly what's happening in the Middle East, and then a much more conservative view of the world and how things should be. But crucially, and this is what Farage was saying, looking ahead to the House of Commons is going to be overwhelmingly left-wing. But yet you have Starmer with a Labour Party with a vote share of less than what Jeremy Corbyn won when he actually only secured a hung parliament back in 2017, something like 36% vote share. And that's going to create real friction when voters turn around and say, well, hang on a moment, we've got a Prime Minister who's not going to do what we want. He's not actually going to be there for us. And the challenge for Keir Starmer is to deliver for the people, who voted for him, but also to deliver for the people who didn't vote for him, because otherwise I think there are bigger problems down the track.
And they can run into all manner of different problems financially, in terms of all the crises they have to solve, as we were saying, the NHS, the boats, defence, everything.
Well, yeah, and if we do have a low turnout election, which it does look like it's going to be, it may well be that Keir Starmer, that sort of 80% of the public didn't vote for Labour this time round. So it's not, obviously it looks like they're going to get less than 40%
so it's
of the
effectively a minority government if you look at it that way.
If you were to start looking at it that way, but that means it's tricky.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness me, another bit of breaking news. Richard Holden has kept his seat by 20 votes.
No.
20.
20 votes?
Yeah.
The parachute opened at the last minute. That emergency parachute is tugging at the red handle.
So for those people in Billericay who thought, you know what, I can't be bothered, you could have made a difference. 20 votes. Does that mean you can ask for another recount if it's that close?
You can only do it so many times. You can do it once, twice. They've been going for a while. I think we're on the second or third recount. And if it keeps on coming up at 20 vote difference, then Richard Holden, because of course he had that seat in the north east of England, there's huge friction because the local association members in Basildon and Billericay wanted to put their own person in, but no, they were told they had to have Richard Holden, the Conservative Party chairman, just parachuted himself in, and it looked like he was going to be humiliated. It was John Barron's seat previously, but he's managed to hold on by
maybe that's more. Maybe that's more of a barometer as well as to how bad it is for the Tories. You know, because in a real wipeout, he would have gone.
Yeah.
Right. And in this scenario, he's somehow hung on.
He's managed. It would have been humiliating, but I think it's going to be overshadowed. I think we're going to get Lib Dems winning in Godalming. I think those are going to be the really humiliating things. Now Richard Holding's
absolutely right. Rachel says this. Nick Dubois is right. If Farage can achieve this much in a few weeks, then how much can he achieve if Reform really organise themselves? As Nick was saying, you know, now that they've got even 3 MPs, they'll have to have a much more, you know, substantial organisation, which has to be a little bit more conventional, shall we say.
And they're going to be much more vocal in the House of Commons. You know, when journalists like myself, we're tuning in, we're looking to what people are going to be saying, and we're constantly looking, you're constantly looking for volatility, you're constantly looking for stories, and it's just going to be very interesting to see how the Conservative Party
More
goes.
breaking news, Richard Tice has won in Skegness and
we're
Boston.
We're expecting that.
We were, but I mean...
Still massive. It's some measures, it's the second safest Conservative seat in the country.
Yeah.
You know, that majority was
so they've now got 4. The reason I'm saying this Theo, is only because only literally 3 weeks ago, people were still poo-pooing the possibility of Farage getting the seat. And if he did get a seat, well, maybe they'll get 1, maybe they'll get 2. They've now got 4.
But it's an area of huge deprivation, and it wants change. It wants politicians who actually listen and actually deliver.
It's ironic, isn't it, that the campaign for Labour was run on the subject of change, and actually change doesn't just apply to them, as it turns out.
And they want a different kind of change from the change that Keir Starmer is offering. They want and they want delivery on policies like small boats. They want the small boats to stop. They want to get net migration down below you know, to levels that might be they consider to be
even down to levels that the Tories promised they'd get it down to.
Tens of thousands, which was the promise back in 2010, and now we've got it north of 700,000.
Incredible. I think we're at the end. Are we at the end of the show? That's incredible. And we're not at the end of the night, though, don't worry, because Ian Collins